This is Jocko podcast number 331 with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Willink. Good evening, Echo.
Good evening.
Also joining us for the back-to-back episodes, Ben Milligan, author of the book By Water Beneath the Walls. If you haven't listened to podcast 330, go back and listen to that one. If you really want to start at the beginning of the Ben Milligan experience, then you got to go back and listen to 298. Ben Milligan, former SEAL teammate of mine, who has written this incredible book about the history of special operations and how from this convoluted, contorted history, there ends up being this random group of men from the Navy that become the go-anywhere commando of choice for the military. So, there you go. Ben.
Well said.
Thanks for coming back, man.
Said better than I could.
So we got barely in 3 hours on the last podcast. We got through World War II in this convoluted, crazy story of hits and misses, of surfaces and gaps. And we're going to roll into now the post-war period.
Post-war, Korea. When I was writing the book, I really didn't want to have a book that was half World War II and half everything else, but it's kind of how it ended up.
And now we just end up with a podcast that's half World War II and then half everything else.
I mean, how can you not, though? Like, when I was thinking about it, like I cover 6 chapters on World War II, and then there's 9 chapters of everything else. But, a third of the book is World War II, and justifiably so. And World War II is dwarfs everything else that we've ever, most horrible war in history. And in my World War II section, it covers 6 different theaters of operation. So, I mean, it makes sense that it would. So, I don't feel as bad about it when I set out.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump into Chapter 7, which is the U.S. Navy's post-war plight and the sailor raiders who led her back to significance in Korea.
Good title.
Yeah, we'll continue. You can see we continue, Ben, with his long-winded chapter titles. So those aren't even subtitles, right? That's the actual chapter title.
No, each chapter title is chapter 1. That's the chapter title. And then the subtitle is that.
Yeah, because this chapter could have been called Chapter 7, Post-War.
In my defense, I had much tighter chapter titles until my editor got a hold of these.
I like how you're taking ownership of that. I like how you're blaming your editor.
No, you're right. It is the other person's fault. You're right. It is.
I happen to like my chapter titles. And for some of these, I spent more time writing the chapter titles. You imagine trying to compress 30 years of a chapter into a single sentence. Like you're doing the absolute best that you can to one, give your reader some idea of what's about to, what they're about to, undertake. But 2, you don't want to give away anything. You don't want to say I think the only chapter that I really give away, I give you, some foreshadowing, the raid that wasn't, which is the chapter on the Rangers. You have some sense that this isn't going to go the way that they think it's going to go. And then 2, the first chapter on the Raiders, the rise and the violent demise of the Navy's first Raiders. You want, you're kind of you're giving your reader a little taste of what's about to come.
Mm-hmm. I know I can be a little bit of a what is it, a dart thrower from the back of the room about your titles and stuff, but
yes.
as I said, and this book is phenomenal. This book is when I read through this book, look, the detail is amazing, but you're a freaking hell of a writer too. It's funny. There's the things that you capture, the things that you call out, the dialogue that you've selected. And what's cool is the dialogue that you've selected. This is dialogue that's documented. This isn't like your authors. You don't do that anywhere in the book. You don't do anywhere in the book do you do the, this is basically what was said. You don't do that anywhere, do you? It's all, this is what was actually said, recorded in this document.
There's only one time where I try to synthesize a conversation. I think that's when I had two documents. One was Donovan's account of a conversation, and then Miles's account of a conversation, and they both, are sort of like confirming what the other said. That's the only time where I tried to synthesize, two separate conversations. Or there was another time when I was synthesizing, the conversation that Hal and Mad Smith has with Kelly Turner about Tinian, and then there's a third account where Draper Kaufman is listening in on this conversation. I'm trying to do my best to squeeze these three things into
triangulate the different perspectives and try and come up with something that's close to what actually
essentially agree with each other, though. I mean, it's you kind of know when something's true when it doesn't exactly agree. If if you're a platoon commander and two of your guys show up for an op and they both have black eyes, and you're like, what happened last night? And if they both have the exact same story, they're lying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if they both kind of rhyme with each other, but they're not exactly the same, they were just told from a different perspective.
Yeah. Well, it's an unbelievable book. It's a fantastic read, and it's the kind of book also you can kind of pick up. This is sort of in the vein of About Face, where in About Face you can pick up that book and you can start to read it, and in 4 pages, 3 pages, you go, oh, that's a good little lesson. There's something to think about. And this is the same way that this book works. Yes, absolutely, you read it from cover to cover, but you have it sitting on your on your nightstand, and you're not quite tired yet. Open this book up anywhere, read 3 or 4 pages, and you get a little lesson, a little piece of history, and also some kind of a leadership lesson in there. So phenomenal from that perspective as well. All right, let's jump into this a little bit. So tell me more about the revolt of the admirals. What happened with that?
So after World War II, the Joint Chiefs, or there's a huge budget, cut. I mean, nothing's ever happened like World War II, and World War II, nothing's ever happened like the end of World War II, where the military, the U.S. military prior to World War II has always had this sort of cycle where they build up to deal with whatever conflict, whether it was the American Civil War or the First World War or the Second World War. They grew from sort of a nucleus force to this massive industrial, mobilized, military. And then after it, you shrink back down to that nucleus force again, so you can rebuild again later. After World War II, the U.S. military or the U.S. public has finally learned its lesson. We can't shrink back. You can't be in this industrial or this era of total war and not field planes and massive ships. You have to keep a residual force afloat and in the air. But there's still, you can't continue to spend what they were spending in World War II. So the military shrinks drastically. So all of the military entities are competing for very limited resources. But now that all of the world's, or all of the United States' enemies have been defeated, the one that still exists is the Soviet Union, and planners don't expect that this is going to be a massive naval effort. The Soviet Union at that point doesn't have a particularly big navy or anything like that. We don't anticipate that we're ever going to need to land ships in the Soviet, or land troops on the Soviet Union, because we have this huge presence in Western Europe. So planners in the Army and the Air Force are claiming that they need more of the resources, that the Navy doesn't need resources, because we're never going to have amphibious warfare again. It's just not going to happen. Anything that the Navy could have done, all the troops that the Navy could have transported, the Air Force can do it with planes. Or we're already ashore anyway. So take the money from the Navy, give it to the Army, especially give it to the Air Force. So the Air Force and the Army have convinced most of the top decision makers in the Truman administration that they're going to pull money, rob from Peter to pay Paul. the Navy sees this prospect of what is about to be done to them, about to be done to their service. And not only are they about to lose all of this money and all of this status, but they're about to be sort of declawed. The Navy's not going to be like a force, an offensive warfare force anymore. And the Navy planners are, they're panicking. Not just panicking for their service, but they realize how difficult, how complex expeditionary warfare is, and they're doing everything they can to save their service, and by saving the service, save the country. So they essentially stage a coup. They not a coup, but they start leaking leaking stuff to newspaper columnists. I talked about Merritt Edson, Red Mike Edson. He resigns from his commission in the Marine Corps so he can get out and start protesting publicly. Eventually, the clamor gets so bad that they have to call a committee hearing in the House in Congress, and it's for several days. It's a big to do. Like they bring in just about every admiral, every famous admiral from World War II to testify in front of Congress.
Yeah, I got a list of names here: Leahy, Blandy, Nimitz, Halsey, Spruance, Kincaid, Connolly, Carney, Burke. Every blue water hero save Kelly Turner, Farragut, John Paul Jones. That is just basically everyone you could. Every pipe-hitting naval leader goes in and makes their case for not taking all the money away from the Navy and giving it all to the Army and primarily the Air Force. No other force and no other nation, Denfield proclaimed, could concentrate aircraft like the Navy, could seize advanced bases, could defend those bases, could promulgate underseas and amphibious warfare, could bring to bear its underwater demolition teams, its minesweepers, and its radio telephone operators to control air and naval gunfire. At the conclusion of Denfield's testimony, a red-faced, speechless Matthews stood and thundered from the committee room. For a moment, it appeared the Navy had won. Interesting, they even mentioned the underwater demolition teams.
They're so important in the Navy's order of battle at that point that absolutely they're going. And they grew, like I say in the book, they grew from 3 teams to 40 teams, and each of these teams is 100 guys, plus each one is assigned its own ship. And not only that, but they have an assorted all the protection that each one of these teams requires. Almost each one gets an LCIG gunboat, plus all the battleships that came with that. The UDTs have risen to the front rank of the Navy's amphibious warfare plan. So, but it fails. The whole revolt fails.
And that's that.
Sort of. It's that until a completely unexpected event happens. The North Koreans invade the South.
That's what we always need to be ready for, that unexpected event.
The unexpected event.
That no one anticipates. One of the things that we've been doing as we've been going through this book, the second time here, is talk about some of the characters that you were forced to cut out because of just the prudence and sympathy for your reader is what you'd like to tell me. Sympathy for the reader, because you could literally make every one of these characters its own book. So tell me about Lewis A. Johnson.
Lewis A. Johnson is, he's a villain out of Central Casting. He's a total politician. He's I think he's a West Virginia attorney. He's Truman's campaign director in his second campaign for office. His reward for getting Truman a second term is he becomes the Secretary of Defense. a position he's not particularly suited for. He doesn't have a huge military record. He did serve in the First World War. I think he was a supply officer. One of the things he did, one of the last things he did when he was still on active duty as a Army supply officer, is he issued a fairly scathing report of the sort of the Army's logistics efforts. He's always kind of been not an outsider, but sort of like the guy with the flamethrower. He does not like the institution that he was a part of. He thinks it could be run so much better. And when he sees the U.S. military, he sees redundancies everywhere. Not just redundancies, but waste. He wants to get rid of all of it. He wants to come in, like I said, with a blowtorch, and he stops production of an aircraft carrier after its keel has already been laid. He's taking money from the Navy and giving it right to the Air Force, almost $400 million in one fell swoop from the Navy to the Air Force. He is, I say, he's a person who never saw an arm without thinking how to twist it. One of my favorite lines from the book. Like he was, he's the villain of the Navy. He's the antagonist. He's the guy who sees the Navy as just a waste of manpower, waste of resources. The Air Force can do everything, particularly with atomic weapons. Nobody else has them. There's no more war. This is the end of history for a lot of people. They think everything's
we're done.
Perpetual peace.
It's when I first got into the Navy when I was a kid. I remember at some point, I got to the team because in BUDS, you're still in boot camp, and in BUDS, you're still kind of like isolated to what the Navy actually is and how it actually works, right? I remember going on my first trip at the SEAL teams, and for some reason, we had to like get gas for our vehicles. And we had to pay for the gas from the Navy supply depot thing. We had a special card. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, you think just like, hey man, it's the Navy. Like they got gas, it's Navy gas. Like we're in the Navy, they're in the Navy. Hey, cool. Or, oh, we need to fly to some other state. Cool. Well, the Air Force is going to pick us up, and then we don't have to pay for that. They're in the Air Force. We're in the Navy, but we're all on the same big team. And you realize it's not like that at all. And that's why these budgetary discussions that happen, they're so you wouldn't think that they would be a thing, but they're the thing. It's not just that they're a thing, they are the thing. And the way this money gets divvied up, and luckily it ends up being for the most part, a positive sort of competitive cycle of people trying to do good so that they can get more money, which drives better results, right? But when you talk about efficiency, like if you were to look at the military just straight up from a pure efficiency, why does the Army have boats? Why does the Army have helicopters? Why does the Navy have helicopters? Why does the Marine Corps have fighter jets? Why? You could just say, well, it doesn't make any sense at all. This is all redundant. If you're going to have one group in charge of the sky, make it the Air Force. You make one group in charge of the ocean, make it the Navy. You've got one group in charge of the land, make it the Army. There's all kinds of efficiencies that you could kind of think and say, yeah, that makes some sense. But the reality is there's these seams, and the seams need to be dealt with. And then you want to have, in a positive way, you want to have the Marine Corps that has fighter jets, and the Navy has fighter jets, and the Air Force has fighter jets. And the Army, well, they have A-10s. So close, but you see what I'm saying? But they all have
you're right.
Bradley fighting vehicles and armored vehicles. Well, what about the Army has them, but so does the Marine Corps. And you just go down these lists of where these things cross over, where the efficiencies are. And so this battle that we're talking about, that's a economic battle for the various forces, is a real thing that needs to be contended with. And that's sort of another thing as we go forward that's going to continue to drive the SEALs to get created, because as you mentioned, it seems like World War II was sort of the end of war for some people. Well, if you want to talk about naval battles, Navy versus Navy, it gets pretty close to saying that World War II is the end of war.
Right, it does.
For the Navy. Mm-hmm. And so then what's the Navy doing? Well, we still got aircraft. Okay, that's cool. But that still is one step back from the people that are on the front lines making things happen. So I just wanted to bring that up from the perspective of where this all goes and how this all plays out. Ted Fielding. Let's deal with Ted Fielding.
Ted Fielding, Mac Boynton, George Atchison, these are all characters that are UDT officers who are almost lost to history. They are they're that first rank of frogmen that I kind of got to go back real quick. So when Korea kicks off, the geography of Korea, determines a lot. Korea is it's a peninsula. It's accessible, everywhere, on every coast of it, by naval guns, Navy ships. But the mountains of Korea kind of preclude, the highways being, driven or built right down the center of the country. So most of the highways in Korea, most of the railroads in Korea, all major traffic is going to go up and down the skins of the country. So on either coast, within 15 miles of the coast, the major arteries of the country are going to be, established. So when the Milligan, or where the North Korean army, when they attack, they push the South Korean military and the U.S. advisors. They push them into this little pocket, down to the far southeast corner of the country, what we call the Pusan perimeter. And the North Koreans are supplying their forces that are attacking this perimeter, up and down these railways that are, on the flanks of the coast or on the flanks of the peninsula. So the U.S. military, having disbanded the Army Rangers, having disbanded the the Marine Corps Raiders, the Marine Back Recon Company, all of these special operations units that had been created in World War II, none of these units exist. And all commanders want is to start fielding something that can help cut these supply lines to the North Korean Army. And the first entity to see the opportunity there and to see, the good that they can be doing on that are the commanders in the U.S. Navy. They see these, but they don't have the troops to do it. And the only troops that are in country that they have are their frogmen, the underwater demolition teams. And they've never done any missions like this. They've never gone ashore. The furthest the UDTs have gone ashore are in Okinawa. A couple of guys went inland to do a handful of things, but nothing serious. So when we get to Korea, because there are no raiders, there are no rangers, there are the Marine Recon are still on their way to the country. The opportunity falls to the only unit that's there, and that's a detachment of UDT frogmen. And they figure it out. They start going ashore, and they start. They find these railways, and they try to blow them up with the one thing that the UDT has is a ton of explosives.
We got some bombs.
We got some bombs. I think the first raid that they actually undertake is in Yosu, and it's by George Atchison, who's. He's a relatively new frogman. He's not. He wasn't a frogman in World War II, but he's become a really good problem solver in his 4-year career in the UDTs. He's one of the first guys to participate in what's called the sub-ops platoon. He started to, instead of being just the frogman who's swimming on the surface, he's perfected lockouts from submarines. He's driven underwater submersibles. So he might not be a raider, or might not be somebody who's trained in inland demolition raids, but he is somebody who's adaptable, and he leads one of the first raids ashore to blow up a railway. And those subsequent guys that come in, Fielding, Boynton, they only take the UDTs even further.
I'm going to take it to the book on that one. Below the seawall and out of Atchison's view, Foley had likewise heard the hand cart and was already splashing into the surf, his legs and arms straining against the slow motion of sucking water and the bad dream unfolding behind him. When he reached the rubber boat, he gave a hushed alarm to the crew, grabbed a Tommy gun, and splashed back through the surf. Swimmers Limey, Austin, and McCormick waiting behind to keep up. Under the bridge, Atchison held his breath, waiting for an opportunity. Suddenly, a shadowy figure breasted the seawall and charged the tunnel, firing a machine gun from the hip. Instinctively, both the North Koreans and Atchison opened fire at the same target, apparently just in time to hear the figure yelling, "Hang in there, LT, I'm coming." It was Foley. Whether or not Atchison realized his mistake, the flash of gunfire unfroze him. Grenade in hand, he pulled the pin and threw it toward the North Koreans. Then he threw another and another. The sequence of explosions, all of unknown origin, chased the North Koreans back into the tunnel. Glimpsing his moment, Atchison tore himself from cover and sprinted to the seawall. As soon as he reached the top of the wall, one of the armed swimmers huddled at the bottom spotted a human head poking over the lip and made the same mistake Atchison had and stitched the wall with fire. One of the rounds tore a hole in the bill of Atchison's hat. Half a second later, Atchison identified himself. "You idiots, hold your fire, it's me," and poked his head over again, then scraped down the wall and onto the rocks. At the bottom, he found the rest of his men. Having rolled himself away from danger and over the seawall, Foley was now alert, but gritting his teeth, shot through the hand and thigh, a kneecap smashed by his fall. Once they were together, McCormick scooped up Foley in his arms, and everyone ran for the surf. That medium, until this mission, the UDT had always considered the furthest limit of their operations. So that's it. That's the first venture out of the surf zone and onto the land.
Foley goes home. Foley goes to the movie The Frogmen comes out a few months later, and Foley, who's recently returned from Korea, he goes to the premiere. He's wheeled up in a wheelchair, and he gets to meet Richard Widmark, who's the star of the show and everything like that. It's pretty cool. That's one of the few things that would have been a totally missed episode had I not gone to the UDT SEAL Museum. That's one of I'm walking through that thing. I think I know everything, and I walk past a picture of Richard Widmark and Foley.
Damn, dude.
Yeah.
They kind of did a good job on the Frogman.
They really did. Yeah. On the Frog. Yeah, the movie. Yeah.
They catch you some good attitudes, right?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I know these guys.
Yep.
The kind of first opening 10 minutes where you're catching the attitude of these UDT guys. Yeah. You're like, oh, I recognize this attitude.
Yep.
I freaking had to hang out with these idiots my whole life. Yep. They're really cocky. They're just getting after it. Mm-hmm. They do a good job with that. So then after you say that Fielding now and Boynton, they start pushing in and continuing to push these operations.
Yeah, it doesn't happen right away. So when the Marine Recon gets in country, the Marine they create this unit, Special Operations Group, or SOG, and it's another one of those sort of entities where the Marines take the front rank of it, and the UDT take the subordinate role of just being in charge of the explosives. So the Marines are going to go ashore. They're going to, with guns and everything like that, they're going to clear or provide a perimeter for the UDT to come ashore with explosives, set those explosives onto the railways, and then they escape toward it. Now they have a couple of these that go sideways. A couple of Marines are wounded badly. One's paralyzed. On the last of these raids, a force of frogmen have to paddle back into shore to rescue their Marine comrades. I think 8 of them are hanging out in the water, in water up to their necks because they can't swim. The UDTs have to hand them straps on the boats, and they just pull them back out to sea. But that it doesn't stop there. So this sort of system, the SOG is broken apart not long after. I think they have a 3-week operational lifespan.
Wait, the SOG, the Special Operations Group there in Korea, has a 3-week operational career?
Yeah, it takes it from all the way up to September, right when the Incheon invasion happens. Once after Incheon, that the imperative to cut the supply lines doesn't exist anymore because we've cut the enemy in half. So once we take Incheon, the North Korean siege of the Pusan perimeter falls apart. So that's not to say that UDTs are no longer involved in raids for the rest of the war. What I found the point of the whole chapter was less about the UDTs and more about the Navy's preoccupation with partnering with any force that would be able to provide them raiders. So they partner with they create SOG. They partner with Korean partisans. They convince the Army to release the Royal Marine Commandos, the 4-1 Commando. They essentially steal the Royal Marines away from the Army. They're supposed to go serve with the Army. Admiral Burke, who's the chief of staff under Turner Joy, he convinces the Army to let him go and creates one undersea raiding force attached to the USS Perch. But he also just creates a raiding force to partner with his UDTs. So at every point, all of these entities are they partner with the U.S. Navy to create coastal raiders. At different points, all these units get plucked away, pulled away for various reasons. But the Navy, sort of in telegraphing its interest, its intent, its desire for its own raiding force, as soon as these groups are pulled away, they partner with another one, partner with this one. At every point, and always sort of the common denominator in that process are the UDTs. The UDTs never really become like they don't become SEALs. In fact, there are guys like Doug Fane, who writes the book Naked Warrior. His position is that the UDT's future is under the water. He has no interest in inland combat. And the contemporaneous documents that I found, several of them are saying that several naval officers are writing that the UDT chain of command really does not like doing this. The UDTs would much rather stick to the water. They've only done this as an exigency, and we shouldn't rely on the UDTs as an inland raiding force. We need to create something different. So all the way back in 1953, you can see some reluctance by the UDT, whereas the Navy is sort of pushing the UDT into this because the UDT or the Navy realizes there's some real strategic potential here in having a force that can project this raiding power from the sea.
One of the other forces that we see surfacing to fill this gap again is talked about in Chapter 8. This is the resurrection of the Army's Rangers and the guerrilla raid that failed to forestall their second death. I'm going to go to the book here. On November 21, Puckett or Phuket? Phuket?
Rough Puckett.
Puckett. On November 21, Puckett's Rangers were loaned to Task Force Dulvin, 2 battalions of mostly tanks and reconnaissance troops intended to range ahead of the rest of the division. For a unit whose motto in the last war was "Rangers lead the way," the promotion from rear guard to skirmishers was an improvement, but still not what had been intended. On November 24th at 2 p.m., machine gun fire forced the Rangers off their tanks and into the scrub. From the Valley 4, Puckett led a daytime attack to Season Hold Hill 224, during which 1 Ranger was mortally wounded. In the chaos, T.F. Dulvin's tanks fired on Puckett's men, killing 2 and wounding 6. The next day, during T.F. Dulvin's phased movement north, enemy fire again opened up on the column, this time from behind. Realizing they were suddenly surrounded, the Rangers bundled off the tanks into the middle of a frozen rice paddy and sprinted up Hill 205. Enemy fire wounded 3 more Rangers and convinced one of Puckett's 2 platoon commanders to desert the company and hide in the valley command post. As darkness fell, the Rangers clawed out frozen foxholes amid the hill's emaciated pine trees, and Puckett scratched down an artillery support plan. His roster numbered 58 souls. At around 10 p.m., the sound of drums, whistles, and bugles rattled the night's silence. A moment later, a cascade of sparks crackled forth from the slope below, followed by the hard thud of mortars and grenades, then a wave of attackers in tan, winter-padded uniforms. The fight that followed was not one the Rangers had been promised. Under the ghostly loom of waning red flares, the men fought from the lips of foxholes like trench soldiers, relying on artillery to splash their slope clean. As with rising tides, every wave inched closer and eroded a bit more. Bullets, grenades, courage, men. After 5 hours and 5 waves, no Ranger had more than a few rounds left. Any man who had not already done so fixed his bayonet. Then came the 6th wave. Shot through the chest with shrapnel in his shoulder, Puckett ducked into the bottom of his foxhole, wrapped white knuckles around his radio handset, cupped the receiver close to his mouth, and begged for another salvo of artillery. The response: get in line. A half second after Puckett's last transmission, 2 mortar shells exploded next to him, killing his remaining West Point classmate and peppering holes from his feet to his shoulders. When he woke up, he laughed. There was nothing else to do. All around, Puckett's men either snaked down the hill or fought to the death. Holy Mary of, goddamn this rifle, one Catholic Ranger was heard to curse as he wrenched open his frozen bolt. The last report of Wilbur Clanton, one of the U.S. Army's first black Rangers, was the unmistakable sound of him roaring in rage as he charged a cluster of enemy troops with an empty rifle. He was never seen again. 3 privates first class nearly made it to the valley floor when they were stopped, not by the enemy, but by the wind that fills their sails of bravery, their duty. Past looters and battlefield executioners, the 3 stalwarts crept over scrub and bodies until they found Puckett, alive but reeling on his hands and knees. As they dragged him away, he was heard muttering the same thing over and over: I'm a Ranger, I'm a Ranger. Months later, McGee would pen a letter to Puckett in the hospital commending him and the 8th Army Rangers for carrying forth the fullest interpretation of duty, honor, and country. This personal satisfaction of doing the job, concluded McGee, is the highest and often the only reward of a soldier. In the entire letter, McGee betrayed not a trace of bitterness at the Rangers' misuse. Of Puckett's 57 men who started the battle on Hill 205, 17 were wounded and 11 killed, their bodies destined for the same fate as those at Cisterna. The enemy was estimated to have numbered around 600, and they were not North Koreans. With some 300,000 troops, China had entered the war.
Ralph Puckett was just, well, not just, but a year ago, 2 years ago, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. His Distinguished Service Cross was upgraded. I've always wondered what happened to the 3 that rescued him, if they were appropriately honored. That's no small thing to creep back up that hill with the Chinese soldiers.
Yeah, that's crazy. And is this the raid that failed to forestall their second death?
No, that's not. So this is that's an example of kind of the Army's misuse of the Rangers. So the
Again.
again, yeah, the 8th Army Rangers are created in country. They're created by John McGee, who's the central character of this book. He was a prisoner of war. He fought at Bataan. He was a prisoner of war for most of World War II. He escapes, and he tries to create a partisan force, fails to do that in World War II, but this is his second chance. And so he is ordered to explore the idea of creating a partisan force at the beginning of the Korean War. He doesn't find an opportunity, therefore, for that, but he does establish an idea for the Rangers. At the same time he's doing this, the Army back in the United States is also getting the idea to reconstitute the Rangers. So there's sort of two parallel things that are happening. One, there's the 8th Army Rangers that back in the United States, they're back at Fort Benning. They're recreating the Ranger company model, but nobody really up top is thinking about how to employ these Rangers and how to create a command to make sure that the Rangers do Ranger missions. So once these Rangers are created, unfortunately, all of these Ranger companies get attached to divisions. Once the divisions have them, they don't really know what to do with them, so they just treat them like regular infantry. So they've been trained for, these behind-the-lines raids. Only a couple of behind-the-lines raids happen. So the only thing that could have really forestalled that second death would have been a raid that showed the potential of these Rangers. And the raid that could have done that almost succeeds, is the Virginia 1 raid, which is sort of a combination of McGee's partisan entities and his Ranger entities. He creates this Ranger-led partisan mission to sneak 25 miles behind enemy lines to a inland mountain tunnel, to destroy that tunnel, to cut the enemy supply lines. And as you'll find in the book, it's a complete disaster.
And how was the research on that? Did you run into some issues with the research?
Yeah, it was a tough one to research. It was I knew that this was the raid that I knew that I wanted to cover, in part because it did so many things. It did so much work for me. It combined these sort of two wings of the Army's one, their reconstitution of the Rangers, but also the Army's interest in partisan or guerrilla operations into a single mission. But I couldn't find a ton on this. I had communicated with a guy who had formerly served with McGee in the partisan command, who'd written a book on this mission, Ed Evanhoe. I talked to his son, got notes that his dad had used to write his book. I wasn't until I was doing my research I came across a POW report for McGee. So McGee had been a POW in World War II, and I knew that one of the members of the Virginia 1 raid had also been a POW. So knowing these POW reports existed in the archives, I did a FOIA request to see if there was a POW report of similar length for Martin Watson. Now, the POW report that I had for McGee was 2 pages long. I anticipated that I'd have a two-page report for Martin Watson as well. After waiting a couple of months, I finally got an email back saying, yes, we have the report. I was like, great, can you email me the copy of the report? It's like, no, it's in another report. It's about 750 pages long. I was like, well, can you just pull Martin Watson's section out? Well, they said, no, it's 750 pages. I was like, okay, all right. Clearly there's a miscommunication here. I'll get it the next time I'm in Maryland. Next time I was in Maryland, I spent a whole day researching something else. I had moved on from the Virginia 1 raid. I was like, I'm never going to find anything on this. I'm going to have to recalibrate, come up with something else that shows what I'm trying to show. End of the day, I was like, oh yeah, there's that Martin Watson POW report. So I requested it. They, wheeled it out in the box. I opened the box. I pull it open. There's this huge binder, and I'm expecting to leaf through it and find the Martin Watson section of this POW report. When in fact, every single page in this 750-page collection of papers is all about Martin Watson and the Virginia 1 raid. It wrote the chapter for me. Everything was there. So.
let me go to the book on Martin Watson, because this guy's, well, he's Martin Watson. Raised in Hartford, Connecticut's Frog Hollow district by the competing lash stripes of an Irish Catholic diocese, a German grandmother, and local French bullies, Martin R. Watson, red-haired, fair-skinned, and small, had survived by learning the languages of each group, by building his body until his back was the size of a dinner table and his legs could not fit into store-bought swim trunks, and by joining up with a gang of local Irish toughs who were destined for the usual options of East Coast Irish destiny: law enforcement or crime. With 75 arrests by the time he was 19, the last one requiring 7 police officers to detain him, Watson's future would have undoubtedly been the latter if the Japanese had only stayed on their island. A member of Darby's 1st Ranger Battalion since North Africa, and thus a veteran of blazing heat, bitter cold, 3 amphibious landings, and more than a few mountaintop Alamos, Watson and his Echo Company platoon had been among the few groups to reach Cisterna's outskirts. There, with all hope lost, Watson, at just 21, had volunteered to stay behind to cover his squad's retreat, a sacrifice that resulted in humiliation in the streets of Rome, followed by 15 months at Stalag 2B, situated on the northeastern fringe of the Reich, and known above all for its cruelties. Watson had responded to captivity by murdering the camp commandant's German shepherd, and by attempting so many escapes that the guards had nicknamed him the Hace, German for rabbit. Upon liberation, Watson had vowed that he would never be a prisoner again. It was a promise his personality was only to keep for just 5 months, whereupon he was jailed for 30 days in East Hartford for inciting a riot and resisting arrest, crimes that preceded 6 more similar episodes: breach of peace, assault, intoxicated assault, and assault and battery of a police officer. Sorry, man. This guy's a freaking maniac. For the last charge, Watson would have faced as much as 9 months in jail had he not re-enlisted in the Army, then re-volunteered for the Rangers. At that interview for the Virginia 1 mission, McGee had seen in Watson a man physically distinct from the others. At 6'4", 240 pounds, a chin haped like a fist, hands the size of country hams, a reddish-brown Cadillac mustache with ends as sharp as tomahawks. The real difference in Watson, however, had lain just below his eyebrows. A gaze so comfortable and confident that he looked 15 years older than his 27 years suggested. There was only one issue. Imposing, experienced, eager, a preternatural fighter, Watson had ended World War II with a rank of Pt.3, technician 5th grade, essentially a corporal. In the 5 years since, he had advanced not a single rank. A fact that belied his leadership potential, which was ample, but spoke volumes about his exposure to a military leader's responsibilities, from mission planning to command and control.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, he ended up getting captured again.
He gets captured again. He not before he manages to get all 3 of his Ranger comrades safely evacuated. He winds up escaping from the mountaintop, Alamo that they fight their way off of. A Navy pilot had crashed, so it's him, a Navy pilot, and 6 Korean partisans, and they are making their way something like 87 miles to the coast, and they are not to the coast, to friendly lines. And the Navy pilot gets captured. Most of the Koreans get captured. Only Watson gets captured, I think, 2 miles from friendly lines, almost makes it. And the 2 Koreans that do make it back to friendly lines, they ultimately are discovered that they had only made it back because they agreed to spy for the North Koreans, and they are executed.
I'm going to fast forward a little bit. On July 27th, 1953, the armistice that effectively ended the Korean War was signed, and within days, the Chinese and North Koreans began publishing daily lists of UN prisoners of war earmarked for release. For a printing press operator at the New York Times who received each list directly from the front, this initiated a nightly series of breath-holding, paper-clutching searches through line after line of names, not one of them belonging to his son, of whom he had had no information for 2 years, 5 months, and 26 days. So this is Watson's old man.
Yeah.
After 32 nights of this routine, and having recently been informed that only one more list of 110 names remained to be published, this father left his co-workers and his post behind and made for the Connecticut shore to be alone. There, hours later, he was found by local police and informed that the North Koreans had, at the last minute, added a 111th name to their final list. A name the local police knew all too well. In the 29 months since his capture, Corporal Martin R. Watson, a soldier no guard or prisoner believed was actually a corporal, had set an example for captivity that to this day has never been exceeded. 30 days after he was captured, for 18 of which he had been starved in a cave to make his 240-pound size somewhat easier to handle, Watson and a South Korean comrade had knocked out a guard with a rock and made for the surrounding mountains, where they survived for 5 days until their pursuers had disabled them by rolling a grenade into their hideout. Never medically treated, except with some shreds of brown paper to cover his wounds, Watson had nevertheless escaped again, this time by wriggling out of his rope restraints and jumping free of a moving truck as it slowed around a bend. This time he survived a week before inadvertently walking right past a wide-eyed North Korean patrol. For these attempts, and one other, plus an attempted suicide with a broken piece of glass, he had been relentlessly beaten with rifle butts and boot heels, and periodically starved and almost always isolated, once in an unsheltered hole for 72 days, with rations described by the record as sparse. Rightly suspected as an OSS spy and saboteur, Watson had also been subjected to almost daily interrogation by the North Koreans, the Chinese, even the Russians, who had drilled him on his exposure to the Gestapo in World War II, but especially on the organization's methods and tactics of the paratroop unit to which they knew he had belonged. Watson's response to these and other questions had been a mixture of stony silence or intentional contradiction, responses that had invariably earned him a switch across the eyes, a pistol barrel across the face, or hours of kneeling with his nose pressed against a wall and a stone on his head. Throughout these deprivations, Watson never lost his bearing nor conviction. Once, standing during a packed camp lecture by a British speaker from the London Daily Worker to say that he, quote, didn't know what communism was and didn't care to find out, end quote. Nor did he and his fellow POWs want to listen to this traitor, commie son of a bitch. For this affront, and as his example to other prisoners, he was eventually frog-marched before a military tribunal, informed of the armistice, then sentenced to death by firing squad. He still didn't talk. In the end, after having been starved from 240 pounds to 120 pounds, his was an example that earned him the final distinction as the second to last UN POW to be released across the Freedom Bridge. On the other side, he learned that the Rangers he had so steadfastly protected from exposure no longer existed.
I have a hard time listening to that part about his dad still. I found that newspaper article, and I don't think any dad can read that without getting choked up. But not just that. I mean, all 750 pages of that document, it was all there, and you just do your best to compress, get as much in there as possible, because nobody else is writing about this guy. You know that at least I suspected, this guy's lost to history.
Well, last time you were on and we talked about this, actually the first time you were on and we talked about this, I said, that's the next book, right? Like, take those 750 pages, get it down. Let's chop it down to, 500.
Yes.
Yeah, there'd be problems to do that, but I think you're right.
What would be the problems? Because I'll just go and photocopy that thing and publish that right there.
It's the way that the documents are lined out. It's each one of these things, or each of that 750 pages, all of these are, most of the things in there are interviews with inmates. Other inmates, and there's no chronology to them. So what I've done, which is it's kind of a wrap up or like a montage of things. That's the best I could do, considering the timeline that I had available to me. But what else is not in there? The entire epitaph for Martin Watson is what comes after the war, and that's what comes after the war for so many of these guys. I've talked to a number of his family members, and it's tragedy. Though he survives the war, and he comes back, and he's honored. He's not sufficiently, I don't think. If there's anybody in the book that is a deserving military member of the Medal of Honor, it's Watson. I think he received. Right, I know he received a Silver Star for that, which I think is completely insufficient. But what happens after the fact is, he comes back to a wife, comes back and he has children, and he's not capable of managing that. Ultimately, he is, because of his demons, he leaves his family, escapes to Alaska, and works on an oil pipeline for years. Only sees his son, I think, 24 times, after he leaves. Gets cancer and dies, I think, when his son is about 12 years old. One of the last memories that his son has of him is in the hospital bed, where he's shrunk from this monster of a man that he used to be into this emaciated figure. And every time his son would come to the hospital to see his dad, the password that he had to knock, or he had to give before he came into the hospital room, was courage.
So, again, unbelievable detail in here. Although you did mention there's a raid that you cut from the book.
Yeah, the Huichan Dam raid.
On the Huichan Dam. What was that all about?
So the Huichan Dam raid is it's another failed attempt. It's probably the one. If the Virginia 1 raid wasn't the raid that would have convinced Army planners that the Rangers had a purpose to play in this conflict, then it was the Huichan Dam raid, and that was it was happening almost at the exact same time as the Virginia 1 team was escaping south along the peninsula, but it was not well planned, but it was supposed to be a raid on to seize a dam from the North Koreans or from the Chinese that were holding it, and they had to row across a lake. They had to collect what little boats that the Army had. Within 24 hours they threw this thing together, and the Rangers had to paddle secretly across, land on an enemy shore, and then climb up a mountain to try and get around this dam. And in the process of that, they're contacted by a sort of a redoubt, that was positioned well away from the dam. They didn't even get close to the dam. So before the morning is even out, they can't retreat, they can't advance, they can't receive supplies. Eventually, they are another force comes and relieves them and rescues them, but the raid itself is a disaster. It's not until later that the dam is actually pummeled by Navy fighter bombers that the raid is dismantled or taken. But that was the one raid I thought, if I couldn't do the Virginia 1 raid and I couldn't show how the Army, had turned its back again on this raider concept, then it would have been the Weichon Dam raid. It's equally, dramatic, and it's equally important. It's just one of those things you have to make a choice as a historian. What are you going to focus on? You've got to, keep moving your reader into the next, you don't want to just jam them up in Korea. You got to keep moving forward. So,
and so ultimately we end up leaving the Korean War with still no real commando unit.
Correct.
And moving in past the Korean War into Chapter 9, Arleigh Burke, the Bay of Pigs, and the launching of the Navy's Limited War SEALs. And I'm going to the book on this. Proposed as separate and distinct from the fleet's UDTs, the recruits for the two new SEAL teams, one on each coast, would, like Adam's rib, be drawn from them. 10 officers and 50 enlisted men per team, all graduates of the training first conceived for the Scouts and Raiders, then modified by Kaufman for the NCDUs. The specialized training needed to create the SEALs, said the memo, would occur at existing Army and Navy schools or could be added to the present UDT curriculum as required. Before long, rumors of a naval commando unit began to hover so thickly above the UDTs that many took the clouds for smoke of their own making. It would require another 6 months of CNO-level conversations, meetings, and memoranda to allocate funding, to carve out basing, to hammer out organizational plans and chains of command, to purchase commercial watercraft and fund new research for silent motors, to resurrect 6 mothballed APDs from retirement, to study the country of South Vietnam, and there to embark on a type of riverine warfare, said one memo that the Navy had not seriously attacked since the war between the states. And at the end of that 6 months, the Navy would quietly, without any ceremony, commission SEAL Team 1 on Coronado Island in San Diego and SEAL Team 2 at Little Creek in Virginia Beach. So we're starting to get to that culminating point.
Yeah, you touch on the controversy there. There's this whole period after the SEAL teams are created where guys start coming out of the woodwork to say, this was my idea. I did this. I'm the one that wrote the memo. All right, let's see it. Let's see the memo. Roy Boehm, who was he wrote an entire book called The First SEAL. He makes the case that it was him that put this thing together, and he based, his idea in part off of Mary Miles's book, A Different Kind of War. A Different Kind of War didn't come out for 5 years after when the SEAL teams are created. Oh. So to use Mary Miles is like his book is the anyway. But yeah, there's a
oops.
Yeah. But it's this whole thing. None of this would have happened without, like we talked about in the last episode, not without the effort, without the foresight of Burke. And there were lots of folks in the UDTs that they had no interest in going in this direction. There were some that did. There was a contingent of folks, and like I talked about, Fielding, Boynton, Atchison. There were guys that had experienced those raids in the Korean War, and they knew that there was something more that they could be doing. But I don't think anybody in the UDTs was proposing this force, this go anywhere force, and the idea that this would be a go anywhere force. It's there in the original name. I mean, nobody had really thought that, they were going to be creating this capture kill commando force, but they had thought of that go anywhere capability, and that's there from the beginning, that sea, air, and land capability. Mm-hmm. And that was all derived from this series of committees and memoranda and meetings that Burke had convened with his senior staffers, and they had pulled that from all the ideas that they'd been collecting from the fleet. They'd been interviewing and talking and having people write white papers and just develop ideas. And the one genius of Burke is that he realizes he's not a genius. He's pulling ideas from every place he can possibly get them. So when these guys say that it was my idea, I'm not necessarily so confident that they didn't send these memoranda. We just don't have them. We don't. I mean, there's only one person who's responsible for that final establishment. And that's him.
Burke. The strange thing about this is, when you say, well, there's a lot of UDT guys that were sort of like, hey, we don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. And if you were to ask, probably the entire time that I was in the SEAL teams up until today, the percentage of people that, if you gave them the choice of what type of operation they wanted to conduct.
Yeah, right. I know.
You know where I'm going with this, right?
This is the puzzle.
Like everyone would say, hey, we want to be on land. We want to push into the land. We want to push into the hinterland. Is it cool to come over the beach? Hell yeah, it is. It's awesome. But we want to go over the beach. We want to get from the water to the land. That's where the cool things are happening. It's interesting to think that it's interesting to think that you would, back in the day, like if it wasn't for the SEAL teams, if I didn't see pictures of freaking guys dressed up like commandos with machine guns in Vietnam, I never would have joined the Navy, ever. Not in a million years.
If you had only seen a picture of a guy in swim trunks with a dive knife.
Yeah.
I mean, was that as...
Yeah, what is that? What are you doing?
I don't know. But the thing is, like, everybody who, joined the SEAL teams in that era, that's what they were joining for. They weren't joining because of the SEAL teams. Nobody knew what the SEAL teams were. It wasn't until, they got there and they were like, oh, there's this other thing?
Yeah.
Like Mike Thornton, Tommy Norris, Pete Peterson, Bob Gallagher. They didn't join the SEAL teams. They joined the UDTs.
They joined to be UDTs.
Yeah, and... regardless, they created this institution.
The other thing that's interesting about this is when you think about the senior leadership in the Navy, including Burke, being on a ship off the coast, unless you're in World War II and you're getting attacked by kamikazes, being in a ship off the coast of combat is totally, it's a world away. Mm-hmm. If you're in a ship off the coast of a combat zone, you are a world away from combat. Like I said, unless you're in World War II and there's freaking kamikazes coming at you, God bless you. But if you're not in World War II,
or whatever this next war is going to be,
possibly, yeah, you're in a different scenario. So it's interesting to think that the senior leadership thought, let us get involved in that. Let us, the Navy, get involved in that stuff over there, over the horizon, onto the land, where there's bullets and bad guys and snakes, right? You would think part of the Navy would say, hey, look, that's not really our business. That's not our thing. We're staying in our lane over here. We'll get you to the beach. You take it from there. So if it wasn't for this void that the Navy had seen over and over and over again, where they couldn't get someone to do what we needed them to do, the Navy couldn't get commandos to do what they needed commandos to do, anybody could have stepped into this role.
Anybody could have. And when I look back and you can almost use the example of aviation as a counter to my whole thesis. You could say like, just because the Army and the Marine Corps had failed to do this doesn't mean the Navy wouldn't have done this as well. I mean, you could have had the Rangers, you could have had the Green Berets, you could have had all these entities, and the Navy still would have created the SEAL teams. And I say I don't think so. And the reason I I think that that's wrong is because of all these episodes of the Navy attempting to partner time and time again. Like the Navy is constantly saying, we will support you. We will just let us partner with something. Stop, taking this away from us. Because all through the Korean War, all through World War II, the Navy is sponsoring various commando units. So I think that argument, it's not an argument that's been made back to me, but it was always an argument that I was thinking about when I was writing this book, like to confirm, to sort of, means test my own thesis. Like none of this would have happened without that neglect, but it also would not have happened without that, without that mentality that Burke had. So it was a combination of two things. It was the neglect of the Army and the Marine Corps, but it was also, not just neglect. It didn't just create that space. It was also, you have this person who's, this person of Burke who, can't stomach a Navy that is not connected to combat. And if those two things hadn't collided, there would not be a SEAL team.
Here's a hypothesis. And I don't know how this is going to land, but I'm taking a shot at it. The water sucks for operations. Yeah. It completely sucks for operations. It ruins your weapons. It ruins your radios. It makes you cold. It can kill you. The water absolutely sucks for operations. And throughout all of these opportunities for all these other units to say, hey, we got this, it seems like at least it might have been a little bit of a factor, just a little tiny bit of a factor for everybody. When the big Navy says, hey, we need somebody that can stay in the water and also go up on land, everyone goes, hey, we'll just take the land part over here. Or we'll give it a try, but then, damn, that sucked. We were freezing. Our weapons didn't work. We lost 2 guys that drown, right? That's what happens.
And there's no enemy there.
Yeah.
Like, what do you want us to do back there? There's some things that maybe you want us to blow up from time to time, and you may want us to figure out how deep the water here is, but a lot of it's just the whole gap of the admirals or the revolt of the admirals. I mean, they want to prove they're relevant. Everybody wants to be relevant, and institutions are just collections of people, and institutions are going to make themselves relevant, whether it's in the market or with government agencies. I mean, we're going to find opportunities, or if there are no opportunities, you're going to make them. And everybody wants to earn their paycheck and feel like they've done something. I mean, if there's nothing to do, well, you're going to find it. Yeah, we're going to find something.
You talked about Burke's CNO ceremony a little bit when we kicked this thing off. I mean, were you going to...
Yeah.
What else were you going to say about that?
The whole chapter had started. I actually found Burke's CNO ceremony on YouTube. I don't know how many times I watched it. I mean, I don't know how many.
This is when he became CNO?
Yeah.
That's on YouTube?
That's on YouTube.
Damn.
And I think there's, 500 views. I'm responsible for 485.
How long is it?
It's like, they compress it. It's like and I think there's a couple of different versions of it, but maybe 30 minutes.
Okay.
But there's different speakers and everything, and I'm watching this thing like time after time. I remember watching this thing like, in the middle of the night, like, I'm not doing anything bad. I'm watching 50-year-old Navy CNO.
Did he give a powerful speech or something?
No, his speech is terrible. He's not a good speaker.
Uh-huh.
He's sort of choppy. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of other speakers that get up in the process that are actually that are better than him.
So why are you so hyped on this thing that you watched it 499 times?
I think a lot of it was just because some of the things that are said. They're talking about this this revolution that's undergoing with naval warfare, or that's about to undergo with naval warfare. And when Burke gets up, he articulates sort of his ideas, and so many of his ideas are the Navy's at the cusp of this technological revolution. And so when Burke comes into office, any person who listened to that speech would think, all right, well, the Navy is going to evolve. They're going to go deeper. They're going to go further up. They're going to, start taking advantage of nuclear weapons. It's going to be a technological revolution in the Navy, and that's where it will stop. But that's not what happens. Burke's interest, Burke's emphasis does not stop. He modernizes the fleet. He puts nuclear weapons on submarines. He stretches the Navy's reach from the bottom of the ocean to the edge of the atmosphere. But in between that gap, he also does a lot of things. I think the most consequential is the establishment of this unit. And you wouldn't have predicted that, or you would not have seen, he would not have conveyed any plans like that in that presentation, or that initial speech. I was watching it not just for what was said, but for what was not said.
How much credit are you giving to Kennedy in this whole gig?
So Kennedy, there's a lot of old frogmen that you meet who they still think that the SEAL teams would not exist without Kennedy. It's a really apparently compelling myth. I don't know why, because Kennedy dies in November of '63. The SEAL teams are established in January of '62, and if there's anything that we learn in the preceding chapters of this book, is that all of these units they could have been killed in the crib. They could have strangled to death in infancy, or smothered by a pillow, is how I describe it. Like all of these units could have been disbanded. I mean, the SEAL teams are only 2 years old at the time of Kennedy's death. So even if Kennedy had been responsible, and I don't think he is, because all of the committees that Burke has convened before Kennedy's even elected, they precede his election. They're already mentioning, the word SEAL before Kennedy's elected. They have these plans already in place. Kennedy's supportive of them, but he's not the reason that they're put into place.
Yeah, some of Kennedy's speeches, he's talking about unconventional warfare. He's talking about all these commando type things,
and he wants everybody to get involved in this. He does, but the Navy the Navy's already forward leaning into this. I mean, the Army too. The Army. I mean, and when Kennedy comes in, his he has a love affair with the concept of counterinsurgency and his favorite unit of all time, which is the Army Special Forces. Mm-hmm. But
yeah, I think I've read a speech of his at West Point that's real. Actually, I've read it on this podcast, because it's sort of how it indicates so much the whole idea of the Special Forces and Special Operations and how big it's going to be for him. What about going, as you're trying to research the Bay of Pigs, you got the CIA. Was there, how available is information about that?
It's a black hole.
To this day, huh?
To this day, I don't know how many requests I made at the CIA's archives for information. I would find a thing here or there, but not very much. I was able to find several of the frogmen that participated in the Bay of Pigs. I was writing up until the final days before the publisher literally ripped the book out of my hands. I was talking to Korean frogmen, or Cuban frogmen, and found one. I couldn't believe I found him. Interviewed him, and then he gave me a number for another guy. Couldn't believe he did, and I talked to him. Gave me a number for another one. Before I knew it, I was talking to all these guys, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. Never expected to find any of these covert operatives, but here they are, and they wanted to tell their story. So it was pretty cool.
Awesome. So we get through that time. Anything else you want to cover in that chapter?
I mean, you could. No, I think Grayston Lynch and Rip Robertson. I mean, these are
these are guys that you cut.
I didn't cut them. They're in the book. I mean, they
could
be their own. Yeah, they could be their own books. I mean, they're both. They're both the CIA. Not case officers. They're the paramilitary officers that are leading. Not just the reconnaissance, not just the Cuban frogmen or the raid that the Cuban frogmen do, but they're also running the entire the mission. They're back on ships, relaying information, doing everything they can to support the invasion. They're held, back, and then when the brigade forces collapse, both Robertson and Lynch, they spend 2 weeks sleeping almost not at all, doing everything they can to rescue as many brigade survivors as they can. Mm-hmm. So when they finally do get pulled, and the Navy supporting that entire effort, the Navy doesn't support the initial raid almost at all, despite Burke's repeated protests and his repeated attempts to get Kennedy to let the Navy intervene. But the Navy does not abandon the Cuban brigade members. They night after night, the Navy sending whaleboats ashore, do anything they can to rescue survivors. And the most compelling characters in the whole testimony that Robert Kennedy convenes in the aftermath of these two guys when they show back up to testify in front of this committee. They're completely sunburned black almost. They show up in boots that are crusted white with salt water. I mean, they're pretty convincing. And Grayston Lynch, he goes to his grave, hating anything, remotely related to Kennedy. He goes on to another career. He was in Omaha Beach. He was at Omaha Beach. He was a Green Beret. He joins the CIA. I think he ends his government service with the DEA. He starts the DEA. If you can believe it.
That brings us up to Chapter 10, which is titled Kennedy's Army of Gladiators and the Counterinsurgency That Blunted Their Swords, Then Cleared the Way for Another Contender. Echo's getting a kick out of that one. And you talk about the fact that this was a really hard chapter for you to write, and this is and it makes sense that it's hard to write because you've got the special forces, which by all means, look, if the Marine Corps isn't going to make some kind of a maritime special operations go anywhere force, then if the Marine Corps is not going to do that, then certainly the Army Special Forces should become this capability. And it's a very bizarre, I think bizarre is a strong word, it's a very interesting thing that drives them in a different direction.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's totally unpredictable. I mean, they create them in 1952, sort of right after the failure of the Virginia One raid, but they see the potential of partisans, or they see the potential of guerrilla forces. I mean, the one disadvantage that the West has compared to the communist forces of the Soviet Union are, we don't have as many men. We just don't have the manpower. So, or at least in the military, we don't. So, our idea, or the idea of special forces, is to be able to, parachute, behind enemy lines and raise a guerrilla force to raid the enemy's vulnerable spaces. The problem that they, discover in this period between 1952 and 1962 is that the Soviet Union is not like other countries. It's not like the West. If you want to, create a partisan force in central Colorado, you might be able to do it. You might be able to find some, wingnuts out there and raise a militia and, go attack oil plants or whatever. You could probably do that because we have an open society.
I was going to say, that does happen. Probably.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But, you can't do that in a Gestapo state or in the Soviet Union because they know they've got identity cards on everybody. I mean, you can't, there's not the infrastructure to be able to do that. So the special forces, have this idea that you're going to have behind the lines raiders made up of indigenous forces. It's ridiculous. So they sense that, they know that, and they start to evolve themselves. They transform themselves into a completely sort of different unit, which Kennedy finds out about, or it's sort of, these two things are sort of happening at the same time. Kennedy is discovering this concept of counterinsurgency and the winning of hearts and minds, and the at least, if not the creation of American freedom fighters, at least denying tribesmen and indigenous peoples to the Soviets. So why don't we support these people? Why don't we, give them weapons? Why don't we train them how to fight? and it becomes, the perfect, marriage of a capability and an opportunity. Counterinsurgency and the special forces. They're married together, and that leads us into Vietnam.
Yeah, the transition. These guys started off where they started, in the early 1950s. It looks like they could end up just being a good commando force or a straight-up commando force.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm going to the book here. You say established in 1952, the Special Forces had been intended to replicate the experiences of its founder and first commander, former OSS operative Colonel Aaron Bank, in 1944. As a 41-year-old Jedburgh, he had dropped into France, led resistance fighters. Then in 1945, as improbable as it sounds, had almost led an operational group of German POWs into the Alps on a mission to capture Hitler. Hell yeah. Guided by these examples, Bank and his successors had erected an organization to match their mission. 2,000 airborne qualified soldiers spread across 3 forward-staged battalion-sized groups, one in Okinawa, one in Germany, one in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, all ready at a moment's notice to drop into an enemy country and lead a ready band of resistance fighters. To physically create these groups, a special warfare center had been hacked out of a remote corner of Fort Bragg in the mid-1950s, and volunteers had been recruited. Plenty of former Rangers, old jockstrap type commandos. No first enlistments or second lieutenants permitted to apply, and ushered through a 3-month course in guerrilla warfare with a staggering 90% dropout rate. This was followed by language instruction and individual courses in one of 4 specialties: weapons, demolition, radio communications, and longest of all, medicine. The pipeline culminated with a multi-week exercise in which candidates infiltrated a notional enemy country, linked up with a band of dissidents, which are other candidates, sent up a hinterland base camp, imparted their individual specialties, and then led their guerrillas on a series of raids and ambushes, all while avoiding an aggressor force of local deputies, National Guardsmen, and state police. There you go, man. That's Special Forces. I mean, that's, what is it, Robin Sage?
It's Robin Sage, yeah. And they still have it, and they... still the idea is that you're going to be able to lead or find these groups. I think that's the trick, is how do you find these groups in Soviet societies, or societies where you have an aggressive Gestapo type police force. You don't have a free society, and the only place that you're going to find a ready pool of candidates to join a thing like this is in sort of ungoverned spaces where there aren't, these, state police or secret police.
What's the deal with Yarbrough's daughter?
Oh, it's one of the things that I was. So Yarbrough, he's the. It was tough to find the character in this. I always try to, when I was working on a chapter, working on a different unit, I was always trying to find, the operation that was, most consequential to driving, that mission's either success or failure, their continuation, their disbandment. But then once I found the operation or the program or something, I was always trying to find the character that was most important to that mission's success or failure. And Yarbrough. This chapter is distinct in one way. It's not. There's no operation. I'm covering lots of little mini battles. I mean, war is changing at this point. So the sort of the chapter structure that I had settled on in World War II and the Korean War, where I focus on one main operation, it's kind of gone at this point in the book because there's so many battles that are occurring, or so many little small skirmishes, but. I focus on Yarbrough because he's the person who he creates the Special Warfare Center, or the schoolhouse for Green Berets, and marries the Green Berets to this new operation of counterinsurgency. So there's no more commando operations for the special forces. There's no raiding or anything like that. It's only COIN or counterinsurgency. So he's training guys not to just lead ambushes and things like that, but he's teaching his guys to dig wells and animal husbandry, and how do you convince tribal people to join your group. You have to you've got to do med checks. You've got to do all the sorts of things that nobody really likes to do. But in the course of him, overhauling the Special Warfare Center, and in the course of him preparing to showcase this to Kennedy for Kennedy's visit to Fort Bragg, his daughter, who's about to get married to another Green Beret officer, she's in a terrible car accident and dies. She's killed. And Yarborough is a month away from his career-making presidential visit. This visit is going to either make or break the special forces, everything that he's worked for. And in that period, he, like I write in the book, he cinches down his grief and he gets back to work. The first thing he does, and I managed to talk to, I interviewed Yarborough's daughter's fiance. He never married after she was killed. But he said the first thing that he did, and he talked to the general several times after his fiancée was killed, but the first thing that Yarborough did after his wife died is the same day he went through the house and he took down every picture of her.
You mean after his daughter died?
After his daughter died. He went through the house, Yarborough did, and he took down every picture. Got rid of every trace of her. He couldn't handle the grief. He just shut it down. And then he spent the next month doing everything he could. He poured himself into getting ready for that presentation.
And Yarborough drove the special forces, as you just said, into not being a commando force, but being a counterinsurgency force.
Right, which creates another gap.
Which leaves the gap. The gap remains.
The gap remains.
Now we end up with Chapter 11. The first SEALs, their search for a mission, and the report that found it for them. The Bucklew Report. What's going on?
So, in 1964, the Navy, seeing that there is trouble in Southeast Asia and wants to contribute but does not know how. The Navy is run by traditional blue water sailors, as it always is, and is trying to figure out how to contribute to this conflict. And they gather together seven naval officers, led by a blue water sailor, Admiral Savage. They send this survey team to Vietnam to get a lay of the land and figure out how the Navy can contribute. The group itself is comprised of a lot of the Navy's kind of unconventional thinkers. David Del Giudice, who's the first commanding officer of SEAL Team 1, he's there. He's sort of acting as a contributor / admiral's aide. There's a former UDT officer, a Silver Star winner, and there's Phil Bucklew and several others who have spent considerable time in Vietnam. So Phil Bucklew, at this point, he's a captain or an 06. He's the second in command. They're there for less than a week when Admiral Savage has I'm not sure, the record is unclear, he has either a heart episode or he gets into an alcohol-related incident and is forced to retire back to the States. Regardless, it leaves Phil Bucklew in charge of this survey team. Now, what would have happened if Admiral Savage had remained in his position as the survey leader? I don't know, but what we do know is what did happen, and that's Phil Bucklew, who was the most forward-leaning or the person who's still in the military who has experienced every unconventional phase of the Navy's sort of inland adventurism. He's now in charge of this survey team. They spend 6 weeks going around the entire country. They go to special forces camps. They travel up the Mekong River. They examine where supplies are coming in, if they're, as the Navy is contending, or as the Navy argues, that they're being sailed down around the coast and infiltrated along the ocean coast. And what they figure out is that none of that is happening. None of the Navy's claims are true. All of the contraband, all of the weapons that are being funneled to the insurgency are coming right down that Mekong River, and they're being injected throughout the country through various waterways. He discovers this and says, we are not going to have an impact if the Navy doesn't leave the blue water and starts doing what the fleet did in the American Civil War, and that's hitting the brown water rivers. And in the report, he makes a point to say that, there's lots of opportunities for raiding along these rivers. He only mentions the SEALs once, never really connects them to that idea of raiding. But he does, say explicitly in the report, the Navy should be in charge of that inland raiding mission. And when the report's delivered, it's sort of in the whole process of this, like, everybody's trying to get a hold of his report before he publishes it, before he takes it back to the Navy. Paul Harkins, who's in charge of MACV at the time, his deputy William Westmoreland, they're all they're having lunch with him. Henry Cabot Lodge is the ambassador to Vietnam. Everybody's trying to get a look at Phil Buckley's report. Phil Buckley, to his credit, he does not want to let this thing out of his hands until he has a chance to let his Navy superiors see it first. It's it's still controversial. Like, the Navy, like I said, the Navy hadn't been involved in a war like that for over 100 years.
So you're saying it's controversial because of that?
It's controversial because he's advocating for, this riverine force, this force that's going to take us away from the blue water, away from the Navy's emphasis at that point, which is aircraft and aircraft carriers and nuclear subs and everything like that. You're putting us back in the weeds. But having been a veteran of the Scouts and Raiders, and then a veteran of SACO, and then in charge of the Navy's relationship with the CIA during the Korean War and all of the various CIA raids with the UDTs in the Korean War. I mean, he's positioned. I mean, he's taking his biography and he's saying, well, why shouldn't we be doing this? I've experienced 2 wars where we've done this already. We absolutely should be trying to support this effort as much as possible. If the government or if the country has decided that this is worth American lives, then it should be it should be a mission worth Navy lives as well.
And he delivers that report to just
Admiral Feld,
and
the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet.
They're head over heels in love with this thing.
No. They're not head over heels. This report gets passed back and forth. I mean, it becomes, like I said in the book, it becomes a bit of a hot potato.
Where does it get traction?
I'm not sure where it ultimately gets traction because it takes 2 years for the Navy to put this thing into effect before they field the Navy Riverine Force, or CTF 116, Combined Task Force 116.
Was there a champion for it above Phil H. Buckley?
Not that I could find.
Interesting.
But everybody, if I had to guess, I would guess it was probably somebody like Norvell Ward, who becomes more important later. But I'm not sure. I didn't find him.
One other part of this chapter that I wanted to run through, because it's pretty freaking awesome, is this. At some point, the Navy sends down some like academics and some psychologists. Oh, yeah. Right. And so I got to read this part. Right. When the Navy's academics had arrived in 1955 to observe UDT training, their purpose had been to validate the course's individual selection tests, the soft sand runs, the ocean swims, the harassments of Hell Week, and short of invalidating any of these, to develop what they called realistic selection standards that would reduce what the Navy admitted was the course's excessive attrition. Subjecting students to a battery of personality tests and classifying their individual traits, age, education, intelligence, and so on, the academics hoped not only to predict the candidate's likelihood of success in training, but also his success in an actual underwater demolition team. In the course of these assessments, they learned that the students below the age of 21 were 8% more likely to fail, roughly the same rate as high school dropouts, while students from broken homes were just as likely to graduate as anyone else. Based on the number of times a student had volunteered to visit the dispensary, which is medical, assessors determined that a candidate in moderate health who minimized the psychological importance of pain, fatigue, and intense discomfort stood a much higher chance of success than, quote, the most physically fit who were over concerned about their injuries. So you're better off just being a tough son of a bitch that maybe can't run too quick, but I don't care if my knee hurts. I'm going to keep going. The least common traits among successful frogmen seem to be restraint, thoughtfulness, sociability, and cautiousness. The most common were responsibility, emotional stability, original thinking, objectivity, and most of all, masculinity. So, as I read through that, I mean, it just, you just picture every team guy that you know, and you know where the bell curve is. And yeah.
I mean, I knew that this had to get in the book. Yeah. I bounced it around from section to section because I had about 15 years to play with. I finally found a home for it here, and I was really happy that I did. There's lots of these little assessments that they had put together over the years, and they were trying to understand.
And they still try and understand. By the way,
they still do,
and they still have no idea.
No idea. That's why it's so great, because it's just, I mean, this is a report done in 1955. We're still at this. We still have no
The Navy still says, hey, why can't you figure out who's going to make it? Why is your attrition rate so high? They still say, I mean, the attrition rate right now is insane at BUD/S. It's insane. Like 10, 15% are making it through. It continues on. Later studies had gone on to test a variety of variables, including the benefits of wheat germ in a student's diet, which proved predictably negligible, and a series of Rorschach tests and psychiatric interviews to determine the effect of sexuality on a candidate's success or failure. Successful frogmen, said the sex report's author, appeared to require this specific, rather masculine and adventurous occupation with all of its self-destructive and masochistic implications because, and this was just the author's speculation of their magical attraction to the depth of the sea and the security of the womb, and an unconscious motivation to prove their masculinity coupled with a fear of involvement with women. Setting aside the psychoanalyst tendency to project their own insecurities onto their subjects, the Navy had not been able to argue with the UDT's results.
That was not the worst dig. I got one in there.
I have never met a group of more self-reliant, hell-for-leather characters, wrote reporter Bill Stapleton after accompanying a UDT to St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands in 1955. Besides their typical reconnaissance exercises, submarine lockouts, and tests with miniature submersibles, the frogmen had also salvaged a 50-foot yacht from a reef, twisted the tails of passing sharks, and when an American sailor had disappeared into the harbor on a moonless night, had commandeered a truck, roared to the wharf's edge, and, as if they'd been scouting the contours of an enemy beach, dove online until they found the drowned man. In their free time, they spearfished, drank untold amounts of beer, erected beachside bonfires, and in overflowing pots of seawater and vinegar, boiled lobsters and astonished the superstitious natives by broiling barracuda steaks. You eat barracuda, barracuda eat you, they had said. Promises, replied a frogman. Nothing but promises. So exclusive were the UDTs, said one observer, that even rank meant nothing to them. When seen in their standard swim trunks and belt knives, surrounded by charts and diving equipment, and asked by passerby if they were indeed in the Navy, the frogmen would invariably reply, regardless of the asker's rank, "Nope, we're all in UDT." So there you go. I went to St. Thomas one time.
Did you?
Yeah, and it sounds about like this. We rented a room. So we were doing training in Puerto Rico, and I think we chartered a plane. And bro, this is in like 1990 whatever. I mean, this is not when people are chartering planes. I don't know who pulled this together. We chartered a plane. We go to St. Thomas. We get there. That place is beautiful, by the way. But we've got an 18-man. We were an ARG platoon. We've got an 18-man platoon. So I'm pretty sure everyone went, but most of us went. We got a bunch of guys. Most of the platoon. We rent one hotel room for everyone to stay in because, we're all cheap. And besides, who's planning on sleeping when we're going to be... long story short, when I get back to the hotel room at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday morning, there's all these guys are asleep. And I remember there was someone that had pulled, because there was air conditioning in the little hotel we were staying. So 2 guys had pulled the curtains off, like ripped the curtains off the curtain rods, and were rolled up in the curtain rods like blankets on the floor, like a bunch of just savages. So really not that much has changed. Yeah. The young UDT spirit survives. And meanwhile, this report that you talked about is circulating, and now we're starting to get some traction and starting to figure out what's going on. Chapter 12, which is called "The Dam Break of Conventional War in Vietnam and the Following Flood of Raiders That Failed to Beat the Navy to the Mekong Delta, All But One." That's impressive, right, Echo?
Yeah. That's good.
Let me get into this one a little bit. The CIA had already discovered there were challenges at attempting to break a wild herd of Mustangs. These are Vietnamese soldiers that they're trying to train into wearing a war chariot's yoke. The CIA's initial solution to this Mustang breaking was, as usual, to outsource the job to the U.S. military's trainers and advisors. In this case, however, the CIA's planners did not offer the job to their standby pool of Special Forces A teams, but instead took a long-shot chance on a 3-man element from SEAL Team 1. A gamble due to the element's leader, a man who had convinced the CIA planners that he was the equivalent of an entire Special Forces A team. He almost was. With a boxer's jab that could part the Red Sea, said one who saw it, and a 6'3" frame that could have waded through it, it had been natural to assume that storekeeper first class Robert Wagner's most likely contribution to the SEAL teams would have been in pure pugilistic combat. His instincts for it were undeniable. Driving a Jeep through a Mac-V compound and passing so close to an Army sergeant that the offended man had taken a swing at Wagner's lieutenant. In the passenger seat, Wagner had responded by slamming on the brakes, then beating the sergeant so savagely that the lieutenant had feared for the man's life. "I never saw anything like that," the lieutenant said later. Not an uncommon expression whenever Wagner was around. As one of the only enlisted UDT-R graduates of that period to be selected to skip the mandatory stint in UDT for a direct assignment to a SEAL team, Bob Wagner, despite a wife and 4 young children, had predictably risen to become one of the team's most eager volunteers for repeat deployments to the Ben Hai and LDNN 3 6-month tours in 3 years. In his role, he had earned a reputation among superiors that had swung between the superlatives of perfectionist advisor and perfect SEAL. reputations he had cultivated while simultaneously building a name as a wheeler dealer for his part ownership of a beachside bar in Da Nang called the Blue Moon. Clean cut for a SEAL, even by 1960 standards, his face a graph of hard angles and straight lines below a flat top deliberately raked to attention. His only physical feature that suggested he was anything more than a lockstep conventional were his eyes. Hard, focused, a bit like a predator in pursuit of its prey, and implying a similar pace. Dude, you're a good freaking writer, man. That's just an awesome little
Thanks.
Little section there. So we got the Mac VSOG, we got Force Recon going on, we got the LURPs, we got the PRUs.
Yeah, it's a tough one. This is a tough period to cover because all the stuff is happening all simultaneously. This is the one chapter that sort of stands alone in all my chapters. They don't focus on one person. I focus on 4 distinct units. Probably the most important being the one you just read, Bob Wagner, who is he's a tough character to compress and to it's difficult to highlight SEALs that were standouts, or it's a standout group already. The guys that are selected from UDT to come to the SEAL teams, they were the best guys in UDT, and then to figure out who the best guys in the SEAL teams were at this point is also difficult. But then when you look at somebody like Wagner, who kind of stands above everybody, in his his foresight, but his ability to use everything, all the tools that he has in his personality, everything from straight force. He in the course of his creation of the PRU camp, lots of different entities come in to try and steal this from him, and he uses a variety of ways to keep them out. One, he just threatens to kick their ass. Two, he, like I say in the book, he threatens to just, pack up his bags and go home, which, convinces the CIA planners to push everybody else aside. All while he's doing that, while he's building this program that nobody else is building, and he's just, he's running from place to place to place. He's participating in missions. He's conducting rifle range training himself. He's managing his own bar. He doesn't. He created the one bar, the Blue Moon in Da Nang, but he also creates a separate bar down.
He's like franchising liquor places.
He's like, in some sense, he's the 1966 version of Jocko. He's just. He's completely. But he's. And the whole time he's got family with 5 kids being at home, but he's like he'll come home for 6 months, he'll deploy for 6 months, he'll come home for 6 months. He's relentless, and by this point in his career he's already done 6 separate tours to Vietnam. Like he's incomparable. While he's doing that,
where did you get most of your information about him from?
There's been a decent amount of. Well, he did a recording to capture this entire creation. He did it with Franklin Anderson. So Franklin Anderson was his commanding officer at SEAL Team 1. He finds out what Wagner has been doing and thinks that Wagner has been kind of exceeding the boundaries of what he was been allowed to do. So Wagner, he sits down with an interviewer that he commissions himself, and he explains the whole thing. He's not going to take his time to write down everything he did, but he's like, you want to talk to me about this? Bring an interviewer here, and then you can take the transcript back to Anderson. And he does it. The whole thing is recorded. He transcribes the thing and passes it back to SEAL Team 1 Commander Anderson. Anderson reads the thing and becomes his greatest advocate at that point. He did break all the rules to make this happen, but he didn't.
It's a good little leadership thing. Sometimes when you're in a leadership position and you're watching something happen from the outside, and it looks a certain way. And it's pretty easy to get caught up in it. You don't necessarily even have to be a leadership position, but like, let's say you're watching a different unit. I'm watching a Marine Corps unit, see what they're doing from afar, and I think, what the hell are these guys doing? And if you're not careful, you can look at someone from a distance and start to be very judgmental without actually understanding anything of that's going on the ground. So that's something I always tried to be very careful of. If I was watching a unit, they were doing something that didn't seem to make sense to me, instead of me going, Ben's over there like an idiot running these operations, I would actually reach out to him. You say, hey, Ben, can you explain to me what's going on? It looks like you're doing some wild stuff. Can you talk me through why it's happening? That's a mistake that people make, and you have to be careful of it. And that's a great example of, well, what do you do if you think somebody's, what you should do is go talk to them. Go find out what's going on. And you know what? Maybe you do see something that, maybe I do say, hey, Ben, you start telling me how you're doing it. And I say, hey, you might want to think about this. And you go, oh, that's a good point. Or maybe I say, oh, wow, I understand now what you're, we had a little bit of this with doing daytime operations in Ramadi. Why the hell are SEALs doing daytime operations? And it's like, I could completely understand someone thinking that, right? What are you doing? Why are you giving up your advantage of doing operations at night when we have night vision and the enemy doesn't? Hey, that's a great point. Here's the thing. We are our actual mission tasking from the Siege of Sodif is to train and fight company and platoon-sized elements of Iraqi soldiers. Guess what they don't have? Night vision. Matter of fact, they would have about one flashlight for every 4 guys. So taking these guys out in the middle of the night was dangerous. And did we do it? Yes, we did. We did it usually in direct action raids where we could set up a situation where white light was okay because we had already, set off a breach or whatever, and now we're just clearing buildings, or they're just clearing buildings. But we had to get in order to fight these guys, in order to get them out on the battlefield, they were going to have to do stuff in the day. That's part one. Part two is we owned the night, and you know who knew that? The enemy knew that. And so guess what the enemy did at night? They didn't do anything at night. We'd go out at night, there would be no one out there. Literally no one doing anything. But as soon as the day came out, or as soon as the sun came up and the call to prayer went, then it was, oh, here comes the enemy, because they know it's a more even match, and now they're out there moving amongst the civilian populace too, who's also awake and has to go, down to the corner store to grab some dates from his neighbor or whatever. They start moving around, so now the enemy can move around with the camouflage of the local populace. Now, if I was on the outside seeing what the hell is Task Unit Bruiser out there doing daytime operations, it might not make sense. As soon as you get an explanation like that, it's like, okay, I get it. There's some reason for this happening. So that's a good lesson that got learned right there. If someone's doing something that seems a little bit crazy, ask them, find out, ask them why they're doing it.
As it happens, if we're gonna, Franklin Anderson is still around. Like he's in his late 90s, but he's still sharp as a tack. I talked to him maybe a week ago.
Cool. Let's get him on the podcast.
He remembers everything.
That's awesome.
He's in Durango, Colorado, and anytime I call, you have to, start leaving a message on the machine and just start talking, because eventually his wife is going to pick up, and invariably she's going to pick up and she's going to I didn't know who this was. He's in the field, clearing cows or something. He's always working.
What a beast.
He's incredible. He's a little guy. But he's still out there, and he's still, like, if I talk to him, if I ask him a question, okay, so was this guy at the team in 1960? No, that guy was an E5 in 1960. He told you he was an E6? No. He was, like, how do you know this?
That's awesome.
Yeah, he's a character. But I got, so to answer your other question about how I got some of this information about Bob Wagner, I spent a lot of time talking to all the folks that he had done this with. Guy Stone. I talked to his son. I talked to a lot of the people that were sort of surrounding him at the time. And he not only is he does he build this PRU program in Vietnam, but he comes home and he builds, sort of the counterpart to the PRU program in the hills, 200 miles away from the ocean, in the Chocolate Mountains. He manages to convince a local real estate magnate to give him like 1,200 acres of mountain territory or mountain scrub, and he overhauls the entire area, names it Camp Macon, and then he creates a mini PRU camp to train guys how to train other people and to lead them into combat. He goes back on his last deployment. He's killed, and the Navy recognizes his contribution. He dies as a storekeeper first class, which for any of your listeners, a storekeeper first class means he's essentially a sergeant. He's an E6.
Staff sergeant.
Staff sergeant, right. He's a staff sergeant. And for his contribution, for creating the the Navy's contribution to the PRU program, for creating everything he did in the United States, the Navy awards him a Legion of Merit, which is a totally unheard of award for a first class petty officer, to get two. But the Navy authorizes the V for valor with it, which never happens. So one of the most highest, awards that you can get, one to a storekeeper first class SEAL. His family, who I was able to interview, his last child was born just prior to his last deployment. They were struggling to, just comprehend, their father's, death and, not having him anymore. The Navy contacts them, lets them know that he's going to be, given this, incredible honor. And the Navy asks if they would like to come out for the presentation of the ceremony. The wife asks the oldest son, the oldest of the children, who's 16 years old, and leaves it in his hands. Would you like to go out and receive your dad's award? The son decides, it's too much. And he says, just mail it. I get it in the mail a couple weeks later.
Oh, dang.
But this chapter is not just about the PRU. This chapter is all about the neglect, not the neglect, but the Marine Corps deciding that they aren't going to fight in the Mekong Delta, and the Marine Force Recon deciding that they're going to support the Special Forces on the CIDG camps, and then the Marine Corps deciding, well, it's too risky to have those guys out there at the CIDG camps. We're going to keep them with the divisions. Then it's about the LERPs, or the creation of reconnaissance troops to support the divisions, whether it's the Project Delta with the Green Berets, or whether it's the LERPs with the individual divisions. Both of these units are, they look like SEALs. They probably act like SEAls. They probably would have had the same sorts of missions as SEAls, in different parts of the country, to go out, find the enemy, kill them, capture people, and bring them back. But the emphasis of all of the divisions is to get these big forces into combat with the enemy. So all they send these guys out to do is find the enemy, tell us where he is, and we'll send guys to you. It doesn't work because it's Vietnam, and there small pockets of enemies. If you don't contact them, if you don't engage them when they're there, they're gone.
They're gone. When you make that radio call, now you got however long it's going to be, they're going to be gone.
Right, they're gone. And the most important thing about this whole period is that all of these units that are created, they're created in other parts of the country. They leave the one area of the country that has the most water, has the most reason for the Navy to be there, completely open for another unit to come in.
Open for one unit to come in. Let's go to chapter 13. The derailing of the 1st Direct Action SEALs in the Rung Sat, and the detachment that restored their prospects. Go into the book here real quick. When the SEALs of Detachment Delta, or Det Delta as it was called, arrived in February 1966, they numbered just 3 officers and 15 enlisted men, not much more than a single enhanced platoon, but a platoon so important to SEAL aspirations that it was led by Lieutenant James Barnes, SEAL Team 1's commanding officer. Known as a friendly and capable administrator, the ideal sort for forging partnerships and acquiring in-country assets, Barnes was a firm believer in the SEALs' traditional interpretation of direct action and upon arrival set to gathering intelligence on all the enemy's command posts, radar dishes, and bridges. Barnes's problem? These simply did not exist. On a map, the 400 or so square miles worth of rivers and canals of the Rungsat Special Zone looked like the splitting, curving bronchioles seen in the cross-section of a human lung. On the ground, this lung was a putrid tidewater swamp that, when flushed, left behind a morass of boot-sucking mud flats and twisted root peninsulas, the high ground of which could mostly be measured above the waterline with a yardstick. Called the evil place by the locals, or the forest of assassins by the Americans, and known as a past hideout for pirates, the Rungsat was, by the time of the SEALs' arrival, reinforcing all of these reputations since it was the source of an increasing number of rocket attacks on Saigon, plus riverbank ambushes along Saigon's main shipping channel. So there you go. Here comes this guy, Barnes, rolling in like, hey, we know what we're going to do? We're going to take out their radar positions. We're going to take out their bridges. That's what we're going to do. Yeah, where are they? They don't exist. It's not that kind of war.
I mean, the example that you just used about, getting to Ramadi and, expecting to contact the enemy at night and do everything. Like, the one thing that I've learned about frogmen, or at least, this modern, interpretation of them is they're going to adapt to find the enemy. And this is one instance where we don't. And we almost, or the SEAL teams almost, got turned away at the front door. Barnes comes in, like you said, he finds that there's nothing that they've trained for. And his response, not really, not having ever done this before and not having, any real, playbook, to work from, he decides, we're this isn't for us. A series of Liberty incidents ensue, and the Navy is ready to, kick the SEALs out of the country. One, you're not engaging the enemy like we expected you to, and two, you're causing problems. So, what do you want? So they turn, to the commander of all the SEALs in country, who just so happens to be the person responsible for putting them there, Phil Bucklew. And they present this whole problem to them. Bucklew appeals to the commander of MACV's understanding of the naval tradition of leadership. Change the leader, you're going to change the rest of the organization. So Barnes is removed after Bucklew's intercession, and an entire new detachment replaces Det Delta, that is Det Golf. And Det Golf, the commander of Det Golf is a junior officer by the name of Maynard Wires, comes in and completely overhauls what the SEALs are doing. Not overhauls the mission, because the mission up to that point had really just been to you go out into the country, set ambushes where you could, see if you could find the enemy, although they hadn't had any success. But just because they hadn't had success, Wires doesn't say that that's an excuse. Like I said, in the book, his message to his men at the time was, "This is the only war in town. We're not going to let it go to waste." And so he sends his guys out every night, and he goes with them. I mean, they're out in the muck and the misery of the Rungsat Special Zone. And night after night, whether you contact the enemy or not, we're going to be going out. So adapt yourself to that expectation.
And that's the detachment that restored their prospects.
It does. By the end of that deployment, I think they have something like 80 kills. Most of them are from one single contact, but they they make things easier for themselves. They create like a houseboat of an old World War II era landing craft. They make it so they don't have to return to base so often. They improve their living conditions. They essentially just start going out for a few hours at a time. And finding the enemy where possible, responding to reports of enemy contact, and then patrolling to those areas. And they get they're not they're not what we understand to be the SEALs today, but they're awfully close.
What was Operation Jack Stay?
Operation Jack Stay is an attempt. It was a sort of a Marine Corps Navy mission right at the beginning, right when Det Delta gets in country, and it's a sort of a Marine Corps-led mission to sort of sweep this one suspected corner of the Rungsat Special Zone, and it's I think they claim it to be this huge success when in fact it's a bit of a disaster. There's multiple heat casualties in the process. There are a couple of enemy kills. I think the only thing real that they find in the entire 3-week-long mission is a Viet Cong hospital, sort of a built-up section of log pathways and little huts. And other than that, they don't find much. SEAL teams try to contribute to it. UDTs contribute to it. The UDTs bring. I cut a bit of a section of the book on Operation Jack Stay. It was mostly a litany of failures by both the SEALs and the UDTs. They had bad gear. They had their contribution wasn't significant.
And you mentioned Guy Stone when you were talking about Wagner. What was his?
Guy Stone.
He didn't get much in the book.
He gets a brief nod, and that's he helps. He's Wagner's best friend. He's Wagner's best friend in the world. He helps set up the PRU training camp, but he's also important because he was a Korean War soldier. He was a forward observer in the U.S. Army. So when the leadership at SEAL Team 1 is trying to adapt their naval commando force to have more hard Army skills, who do they turn to outside of their traditional avenues for support with the Ranger School and things like that? They turn to a former soldier, Guy Stone. Guy Stone sets up a curriculum. He gets smart on all of his old Army manuals, and he sets up training for SEAL Team 1 and starts putting all the guys through it. Before they go to Vietnam, they got to go through Guy Stone's course.
So they managed to, and again, I mean, you have so many good stories in there about what happened, what this looked like, who these characters were. Now we move into chapter 14. The direct action SEALs who dodged a diversion, then perfected a mission that propelled the teams past the riverbanks into history. Going to the book here. In the winter of 1956, Robert T. Gallagher joined UDTR, and I've said that already today one time, but this is what BUDS used to be called, was UDTR, which is Universal Underwater Demolition Teams Replacement Training. So Gallagher joined UDTR Class 17 at Little Creek, a class comprised of 97 personnel, including 5 Navy officers, 5 U.S. Army soldier graduates from Ranger School, and 1 black sailor from Ohio who remarkably had taught himself to swim in a creek after a town order to integrate the local pool had prompted the owner to fill it with rocks. How'd you dig up that piece of information?
I mean, that was from Bill Goines. He was the first Black SEAL. He'd been one of the plank owners at SEAL Team 2, and he's he's still alive and still contributing. He's helping with the Navy's recruitment efforts of black sailors. I mean, he's of minorities. He's an incredible person, and there's not a trace of bitterness. I mean, he has every right to be bitter, for everything that he went through, and he's just talking to him is just it's just such a, it's a pleasure to talk to him.
Let's get him on the podcast. At one point in the first few weeks the temperature had dropped so low that Gallagher and his classmates had been forced to break the ice that had crusted the edge of the Chesapeake Bay so their instructors could torture them in it, a ritual not unheard of in UDT's East Coast winter classes. After 4 weeks of this, 4 weeks of heaving logs over windswept sand dunes, 4 weeks of wet fatigues freezing to their skin, 4 weeks of elephant marches with boats on their head, a misery that had rubbed Gallagher's already thinning Widow's Peak raw, more than 50% of the class had quit, including one of the Navy officers and all 5 of the Ranger School graduates. It was just too psychological for them, one man remembered. And there had been so much farther to go. After a total of 16 weeks, Class 17 had shrunk to a mere shadow of itself. Of the 97 who had started, only 14 graduated. One of those, incidentally, was the undaunted black sailor from Ohio. Another, of course, was Gallagher. Gallagher's subsequent career in the UDTs was more than commendable. Wherever he went, he excelled, and more. This reputation, plus his standing as a sturdy drinker, had made him a natural choice for the first batch of frogmen to join SEAL Team 2. There he had excelled again, undertaking the most difficult assignments, including a course to qualify as an explosive ordnance disposal technician, or EOD tech, one of the military's more cerebral ratings, and an 8-month overseas advisory billet to Istanbul, where he helped train the first all-Turkish Navy UDT class. From these assignments, it was possible for Gallagher's peers to assemble a portrait of his personality, hard-charging and intense, yet entirely devoid of pretense. When deployed, it was only on the rare occasion he was seen in anything but a rumpled pair of UDT shorts. He was above all known for his quiet confidence, the oxygen of his leadership, but with the emphasis on quiet. He had all the sensitivity of a rock, remembered one teammate. Unless at a bar, the only place he seemed to allow his sense of humor to walk around off-leash, he was just more pulled into himself than others, remembered a teammate. Just tough to get to know. For the force of his personality, for his combat experience, Gallagher was, from the moment he joined, the 7th Platoon's unofficial leader. No one argued with him, said Roy Matthews, about to depart on his first deployment. You might win the fight, but you'd never want to go to sleep again. The reality was actually slightly less severe. Certainly Gallagher was all the aforementioned, was remote, intense, almost humorless, but there was another quality that would soon help him become one of the best combat leaders in the history of the Navy. Essentially an orphan, from the day Gallagher had joined the SEALs, they had been, whether they knew it or not, his family. Nothing mattered as much to him, nothing except maybe the mission. A mission whose evolution would have no greater contributor than Gallagher.
He's I don't even know where to start with Gallagher. I say that I don't like the term hero, but if I have to, if you had to pick one, or if you had to pick a person that, to kind of, set up as an example for young frogmen, this is it. He's the anti-Marcinko. He's not boastful. He's not. He never stretched the truth on anything that he ever did. Partly because he just never talked about what he did. I managed to talk to, I interviewed a lot of people for the book, and I'd always find a way to, convince somebody to talk to me. When I finally was able to track Gallagher down, I kind of took a deep breath, dialed the number. He answered the phone. I hastily ran through. Hi, this is Ben Milligan. I'm writing a history. I'm a former SEAL. Blah blah blah. Trying to get through my introduction. Tell him, I'm going to be writing about the 7th Platoon. Would love to hear your perspective. I've talked to many of your teammates. I've talked to Pete Peterson. I've talked to Roy Matthews. I've talked to all these guys. Would love to get your perspective if you have time. I hear he takes a pause and he goes, I don't think I want to do that. And he hangs up. All the work that I had done.
That was that, huh?
That was it.
That was your interview.
That was it.
Did you ever get anything else out of him?
Nope. Never did. Talked to everybody. I mean, everyone in his orbit. Learned as much about him as I've learned about anybody. He had, when you were reading through that, there was stuff that didn't make the book. Like when I say he's essentially an orphan, I mean, he's essentially an orphan. I hope that, a reader or a listener, has this, some sense of what that means. Like his childhood was nothing less than heartbreaking. His father abandoned him and his sister, him and his brother and his sister to and their mother, who had tuberculosis, essentially to a sanatorium. When the mother died, both Bob and his sister were placed in 2 separate orphanages. Bob, who at the time I believe was only around 4 years old, his sister was 2.5, and they were so close, inseparable, that every night Bob would escape his dormitory in the orphanage, sneak across this really, really wide expanse of field between the girls' dormitory, sneak into the girls' dorm, and sneak into her bed just so she wouldn't have to sleep alone.
And this is when he was 4 years old?
Yeah.
How'd you get this information?
From his niece, who was essentially raised like, I don't know if she was very close to her uncle. It wasn't just the war that, made him, or just combat that made him, insular and, shut off from everybody. I think, the fates kind of contributed, to create that person. And he was not a broken person, but he had a real hard time relating to folks. He's had a bad relationship with his own children. It was estranged from his wife. His wife never divorced him, but he was estranged from her. And he had a really, tough time. I think the only person that he was really close to in life, aside from, his teammates, aside from, somebody like Pete Peterson, was his sister. As a side note, this last muster down at Fort Pierce, they had, because of COVID. Have you ever been to Fort Pierce when they do the muster?
Yep.
The
I haven't been
swim?
to the muster, but I know about the ashes swim. But tell everyone, that's awesome.
So they were doing an ashes swim. They every year at Fort Pierce, once a year they will do an ashes swim. So if anyone connected to NSW has died in the previous year and they would like their ashes to be committed to the ocean, they do a sunrise swim out into the Atlantic, and 2 of your teammates will escort your ashes out into the sea, and they'll release their ashes. I'd never been to one of these things. I'd heard about them. This year, I was invited down to give a talk on the history of the teams, and they asked me if I would, participate the next morning in one of these, swims. I knew Pete Peterson was going to be there. I'd interviewed Pete a number of times for the book, and I knew that he was going to be swimming Bob's ashes. Bob died several months before, and he was going to be swimming Bob's ashes. In addition to Bob's ashes, there were 2 other members of the 7th Platoon whose ashes were going to be swum out. So I told Pete, if you need a swim buddy for this, I'm happy to join you, and he was more than happy to accept. So the next morning we're out there, 4 a.m. They want us to all muster, kind of back by the museum away from the ocean, and it's November. And it's pretty cold. It's in probably the high 40s. And we're just out there in swim trunks with flippers, and they're going down the roster. Okay, all right, here's a name. Here Bob Gallagher, who's swimming Bob. Pete. He's in his mid 80s at this point. He raises his hand. He's he's an older guy. But he's like, I'm swimming Bob. It's like, all right, who's swimming with Pete? I was like, I shot my hand up so fast. I'm swimming with Pete. But after, you know, you get your assignments, you know, right, you know, before sunrise, they march you out. And I was not expecting, you know, sort of the spectacle of what was out there. They had a shadow box set up for every person whose ashes were being swum out. So about 40 different shadow boxes with a, you know, flag. And then behind that, you know, facing the ocean, probably about 50 people per shadow box of family members that were all assembled there to watch their loved ones' ashes being swum out to sea. They had you know, bagpipes. They had a Navy band. They had a flag team. It was a huge collection. Thousands of people on the beach. They do a flag ceremony. So they kind of they position the swimmers, you know, behind the shadow box facing the family, and they go down one by one, and they'll do a, you know, presentation of the flag to the family. Now they had, you know, set us up, me and Pete, behind Bob's ashes, but right next to Bob's family, they had Roy Matthews, who was also in the 7th Platoon, and they also had Ron Yaw. Ron Yaw's family was right there too, and they were both members of the 7th Platoon. And I'm standing there with Pete, who was, you know, their OIC, you know, in Vietnam, and you can see Pete's getting emotional here, and I don't blame him. I would have been too. And I'm starting to think, you know, seeing Pete, and they finally, you know, after the flag presentation, they hand you the ashes, and they hand Bob's ashes, you know, to us. Bob's at least 20 pounds. I mean, the bag of ashes, it's pretty heavy. I'm looking at, you know, Pete, and they finally tell us, you know, about face. Start marching into the ocean. We start backing up. Guys are getting on line, you know, putting fins on. Pete's having, you know, a little bit of a tough time getting those fins on. I'm starting to see the line, you know, kind of edge away from us a little bit. Like, we're starting to be like, all right, me and Pete are starting to get left behind here a little bit. Like, I'm starting to wonder if, you know, the waves are pretty big for Florida. I've never seen waves that big in Florida, but we're starting to back into it. And I'm looking at Pete, and I'm like, Pete, we don't have to do this, man. We can find somebody else to swim, you know, Bob out. We'll take care of this. If you can't do this. Pete looks at me, and he goes, I think there's really only one thing to do here. And it's like, all right. I start to grab his arm, like, we're going to head back in. He takes off. Like, he dives through that wave. He went from being like an 83-year-old man to a 25-year-old frogman like that. I couldn't keep up with him. I'm doing everything I can to swim. I'm dragging Bob going through the surf. And finally we get out there through the breakers. Sun comes up. Command comes out. I hand Bob to Pete. Pete lets him go. I mean, the whole thing, the whole 10 years of work on this book, that it was worth it in that moment.
Man.
But I mean, you can see it, like, you see it there, like, you see, like, I mean, even the guys, I've been talking to guys that are, you know, from that era, guys that aren't even mentioned in the book, but they are, you know, to a man, they are, you know, they all express, you know, how pleased they are that, you know, Bob's contribution, you know, Bob Gallagher, who's, you know, never, touted his own achievements. I mean, if anybody's going to, you know, capture the attention of that era, I mean, it should be him. It's an interesting thing about him too, that, I mean, he, like I say, he's the anti-Marcinko. He's not, you know, he's not a. I mean, he had such pride in the rest of the Navy, like in a way that when I set out to write this book, I always assumed that I'd be writing a book that, you know, confirmed all the myths about us, that we did all this ourselves, you know, and then the Navy, you know, was always the branch of, you know, the parent command that was trying to keep us, you know, assigned to the water. when I found the opposite to be true, and then when I discovered Bob Gallagher's lasting legacy, if anything, is, you know, how much pride he had, not just in the SEAL teams, but in his parent service too. He left the SEAL teams. One of the last things he did, he took a commission, which I don't know that anybody knows about it, but he took a commission as a warrant officer, and one of the first things he did was he had to leave the SEAL teams. He had to go to an aircraft carrier and work on this aircraft carrier with fleet sailors, and every SEAL that he ever met afterwards, to a man, he told them it was one of the things he was most proud of. He was able to see, you know, the U.S. Navy at work. And see how committed, you know, his fellow shipmates and sailors were. You know, they weren't SEALs. Maybe these guys couldn't run and couldn't do the things that frogmen can do, but they still had pride in their work, and they still, you know, had a mission to do, and he was, you know, every bit as proud of that as he was of his, you know, career in the teams.
What stood out? How did you get to that platoon?
You know, I spent, you know, a long time trying to figure out where that transition had occurred. You know, that transition from where the SEAL platoons were, you know, patrol and ambushers to, you know, capture kill commandos. And, you know, Marcinko, he makes all these claims in his, you know, Rogue Warrior book that it was his platoon, that it was the 8th platoon that made that transition. And I went through and I was gathering as many, you know, barn dance cards or after action reports as I could. And, you know, I was going through operation by operation, platoon by platoon, trying to see, like, you know, who had made that transition. I went through 8th platoon, you know, among others. I was plotting insertion points, extraction points, actions on objective points for every one of their missions. And, you know, after, you know, doing 3 months worth of Marcinko's missions, I realized every claim that he had made in Rogue Warrior is bullshit. Like, which is sad, because, you know, what his platoon did was totally commendable. It was incredible, like, what his platoon did, and their contribution to Chow Duck during the Tet Offensive, amazing. But, you know, he was making, you know, outlandish claims, and, you know, and not only burnishing his legacy, but doing it at the expense of other folks too. I couldn't understand why he was. But I mean, I found the 7th platoon because I was just methodically going through these platoons, you know, platoon at a time, operation at a time, and I noticed in the 7 platoons, you know, they started out like everybody else. You know, they got to, you know, Vietnam, and they would get a little bit of intel, and they would go out, they'd set an ambush, they'd patrol to contact, but by, you know, the 3-month mark in their deployment, their operations take a noticeable turn, and this is when they meet their interpreter, Min, who's a Vietnamese sailor, and they enlist him into the organization. He's not just an interpreter, though. He's like he's a source of intel. Like, he's able to connect them to you know, institutions in the country that, you know, provide them a wealth of information, and then they start going out, and they're not just going out for Viet Cong. They're going out for Viet Cong with names. They know who they're going after. So you know that the 7th platoon makes that turn, and by the end of that platoon, by the summer of 1968, the platoon that followed the 7th platoon, they're doing what the 7th platoon did, but better. Yeah. I mean, Rudy Bosch, you know, rolls in with the 10th platoon, and every platoon then it franchises at that point. Every platoon, whether it's a SEAL, an East Coast platoon or a West Coast platoon, they're all doing it. They're all, you know, relying on this capture kill mission, and it doesn't really start to trickle off until you know, the war really starts to drive the end of the funnel. The money starts to shut off. You know, they stop getting, you know, rounds for their M16s. They don't get any more gas money for their Jeeps. They take Jeeps away from them. They make them start doing watch standing on various bases that they're on. So all the intel collection that they've been doing up to that point in the war, it's starting to get, you know, they're not able to do it like they were in, like, you know, 69, 70, 71. So.
Well, first of all, you want to get some SEALs mad, make them stand watch.
Oh, yeah. I read that.
These guys get so mad. We had to stand watch. We had to stand watch on people we captured, actually, when my first deployment to Iraq. And you would have thought like I'd say, hey guys, get jocked up. We got a QRF to do wherever, but get your gear on. We're going into freaking hell. Guys would be like, cool. But you say, hey, I know we just did that mission. You got to stay and watch at 5 o'clock in the morning. Are you kidding me? He's so pissed off. I would take that. I would take the 2 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock. Myself and the AOIC would take the worst watch of the night, the one that you had to wake up in the middle of the night. You know, the other ones you could kind of sleep until. No, not us, but guys don't like staying and watch. The other thing that's interesting about this is, you know, having talked to a number of SOG guys, man, they were so compartmentalized. They would get like no turnover. Things would happen. They would never tell anybody.
Right.
And I mean, I'm talking like lesson learned from an operation. Hey, don't use this type of weapon in this situation. They'd never hear that. It was, well, not never, but it was very limited to how much they would be able to pass on or that they would receive.
That's
it would all be kind of centralized. Like maybe there'd be one guy that would debrief them. So the fact that the SEALs were sharing, hey, this is a better way to do operations. Here's how we can make a huge impact. That's important from a leadership perspective when you're out there working in a company, in a business, in a team. When you learn something, pass it on so everyone can benefit.
The other thing that was totally benefited the SEALs at this point is, you know, this policy that the rest of the military had of individual rotation. They thought that having, constant, presence there, was easier to, keep all the equipment there, but we'll just, feed guys onesie twosies into a unit.
It's horrible.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
They get to country, nobody knows them, nobody trusts them. They don't know anybody else. Nobody wants to train them.
Never worked together.
They never worked together. The Green Berets did that. The LRPs did that. I mean, all these special units that we call special, they are learning together as they operate.
All the time.
It never
ends.
Then the best guys are getting pulled out. Whereas the SEAL teams, they were always deploying as a group. Mm-hmm. They were coming home as a group. They were training together, and they would redeploy as a group.
Yeah. And by the way, you get turnover operations. It's not like this. Everyone shows up and now no one knows what to do. You get turnover operations.
Right. There was a period, 2-week period.
Yeah. So it's not like doesn't it kind of make sense to have new guys cycle in? And that way you still got some experienced guys? No, it doesn't. You got to work together.
Yeah.
Moving on to chapter 15. And I think this might be Echo's favorite title right here. The Navy's skeleton key to inland combat and the final against the current achievements in the war's ebb tide that exposed the SEALs' preeminence as the U.S. military's go-anywhere commandos. I even got you laughing at this, Ben. Your editor.
Well, in my editor's defense, I'm the one that wrote the titles.
But as you said, it kind of explains us, what's going on here a little bit. Let me go to the book. Within 2 months of his arrival, Zumwalt, that's the Admiral Zumwalt's strategy had pulled swift boats from the coastal blockade to take over the PBR patrols in the lower delta and had reclaimed some 90% of the vessels assigned to the Mobile Riverine Force to push into Bloody Alley of the Parrot's Beak, that portion of Cambodia that stabbed the insurgency supply lines like a knife into the delta's heart. With Zumwalt's arrival, the SEALs went from being the fleet's prodigal stepchild raiders to the fleet's skeleton key to inland opportunities for Navy boats, Navy ships, Navy fighters, Navy helicopters, Navy gunships, Navy intelligence officers, even Navy Seabees. To goose the Navy's involvement in SEAL operations, Zumwalt, always wearing forest green fatigues and occasionally accompanied by a camera and crew and reporters, routinely dropped in on his platoons and always posed a variant of the same question: how can I help? In short order, that help was showing up in piasters for Hoi Chans and interpreters, Navy jeeps to meet with sources, daily grocery drops by the Navy's helicopter transports. After the friendly fire death of Lieutenant Junior Grade David Nichols, Zumwalt took less than 3 days to invest one SEAL compound with an actual Navy physician. All told, it was the kind of self-serving that helped infuse the SEALs with an even greater operational capacity, so much so that within 6 months of Zumwalt's arrival, the headquarters of the SEALs Task Group Commander in Vietnam was finally upgraded from a cluttered desk at CTF 116 to an entire Quonset hut. I need 15 more, 20 more, 100 more SEALs, remembered three-war veteran frogman Frank Kane of Zumwalt's repeated calls to increase his complement. When such requests collided with the reality of SEALs' actual manning numbers, levels nowhere close to the Green Berets, Zumwalt even enlisted the efforts and advice of the commander of U.S. naval forces in the Philippines, none other than the bullfrog himself, Admiral Draper Kaufman. So that's a huge turning point when you start getting this massive support from Zumwalt.
Yeah, I mean the SEALs are no longer they're no longer at the fringe of the Navy's operations. They're the harpoon that not only is striking into the heart of the enemy, but just like a harpoon, it's attached to a rope. It's pulling the rest of the Navy inland.
Yeah, that little detail that you got in there of Zumwalt always wearing camis or always wearing fatigues, that's just like...
Yeah, I mean, you're always on the lookout for whatever, that little detail that's going to, it's going to say something else to your reader. Or, just the fact that, his sideburns alone convey to the rest of his sailors that, hey, I'm cool like you. Up to that point in the Navy, there's no beards allowed. I mean, when he becomes CNO, what's back in fashion in the U.S. Navy? Beards. He brings it all back. But I mean, he's totally, he has the bona fides to do it. He's a junior officer all through through World War II. He's one of the only sailors to take a ship up the Whampoa River into Shanghai. He actually sees what Jocko is doing at the tail end of World War II. He turns over, or he does a prisoner exchange with Phil Bucklew in 1945. And he's seen, even if he's not participated in it, he's gotten a glimpse of what the Navy's capable of. And when he gets there to Vietnam, he knows the Navy could be doing more. And then, not only is his role as the commander of naval forces in Vietnam important, but he's the one that ultimately becomes the chief of naval operations. You thought the SEALs were, important before. I mean, when he becomes a CNO, you're vaulting the SEALs' preeminence along with him. So.
Pretty neat, the Zumwalt class ships, USS Mikey Monsoor.
Oh, it's incredible.
Yeah.
That connection is, it's so cool.
How about, as this is, you got trying to put together Bob Carey's mission. How hard was that?
It's not Bob Carey's mission. It's sort of a one-off. And I thought about focusing on Bob Carey's mission for the chapter, but it's not like an indicator of the Navy's inland adventurism, because it's right on the coast. Mm-hmm. It's right in Nha Trang Bay. What signifies that it's important in the SEALs sort of elbowing out its competitors is the fact that it's right around the corner from where the Green Berets are operating. That's their corner of the war. So yeah, it's coastal, but it should have been in the Green Berets territory. And here comes, SEAL Team 1 along with CTF 115. CTF 115 is the coastal squadron, or the coastal task force. They get their first SEALs, and what do they do with them? They start sending them everywhere. And it's one of the, you look at that mission, and it's so different from what the rest of the SEAL teams are doing in the Mekong Delta, but it's so indicative of this transformation that the SEALs have gone through. They're not a patrol and ambush force anymore. Now they're going after individual Viet Cong so they can capture them, flip them, or ransack them for other locations. So the whole mission is not this is an entrepreneurial. This is not a let's see what we get. They know who they're going for. They've got good information, and they plan a really cool special operation to go get them.
Did you feel tempted to get sucked into the sea wolves at all?
Oh yeah.
Because I've had the sea wolves.
I had to keep them at arm's length. I was like, I don't have time. I was like, I would find. I found I had a lot of documents about the sea wolves too. I was like, man. Yeah. And Navy. Just the Navy, gunship squadrons alone. I mean, they've gone through, very, very similar, experience of let's bring them back, let's disband them again, bring them back, disband them again. Like,
well, you and I experienced that. I mean, we had the reserve squadrons that were working pretty much as the Sea Wolves did. They were like at the beck and call of the SEALs. Yep. My first deployment to Iraq, we worked with those guys all the time. They were our full support, and they were fantastic. But the Sea Wolves in Nam, man, commissioned in Vietnam and decommissioned. The only squadron ever to be commissioned in combat and decommissioned in combat. There's that one story. They're running out of fuel. There's a platoon on the ground. They're like, we're not leaving. One bird's like, hey, we're not leaving. We'll just run out of gas. So they have enough gas to get in there and grab the last few guys, but they don't have enough gas to make it back to base. They land in the middle of a rice paddy somewhere, and they're using an ammo can to siphon fuel into an ammo can and pour it into the Huey to get that thing back to base, bro. These guys, when you talk to, and the Vietnam guys, the Vietnam SEALs I've had on the podcast, like they just absolutely, without question, love the Sea Wolf guys, because those Sea Wolf guys, they took so much risk to support the SEALs on the ground.
When I was, there were a couple episodes when I was, I would see like a report of an Army slick who, had said, well, we're not going to land or something like that. And then the report of a Sea Wolf pilot saying, well, if you don't land, I'm going to shoot you down. And I was a little skeptical of that. I was like, I don't know if that's cricket. And then I found another one. I was like, I'm wondering if this happened maybe a couple of times. So it made it into the book. I mean, not to ever diminish what those Army slick pilots did. They were doing the Lord's work too. But
yeah. And then as you're trying to get like the last 3 years of the war,
to compress that.
How hard was that?
It was tough. I had to, I realized that I'd made my point. I knew that I'd accomplished what I set forth to establish, which is the moment when the SEALs became what we are today. So now all I was trying to do is just kind of further solidify how that had happened, and I discovered some stuff along the way, like the 9th platoon or the 9th division being the 9th. One of the most interesting things to show how the Navy had become so important in the Mekong Delta is finally the 9th division starts copying the SEALs. The LRPs start to deconflict areas and take them away from the SEALs, and the SEALs are they want to go out and do this raid, and they can't because the Army is already there. And the very good chance that if the war had continued on, for a little bit longer, that the Army would have, taken all the Navy's missions, and the SEALs would have had to either move someplace else, adapt again. I'm not sure what would have happened, but there's a good chance that the Army's special operations would have gotten a lot better, a lot better, a lot faster. But they pulled the 9th Division out of the country altogether, leaving the SEAL teams as the only all-American commando force in the entire 4th Corps for 2 years. Which, talk about opportunity.
Going back to the Sea Wolves and them answering the call, that's something that I learned out of the gate when I got to SEAL teams, was that, hey, in Nam, if it was a platoon in trouble or if it was a down pilot, we were going bright light, no questions asked. That's an attitude that stuck through till this day. If something's going on like that, we're going.
Whatever. I don't know if it was pulled from the Sea Wolves, but I mean, we saw it carry through. I mean, in our time. I mean, the SEAL Team 10. I mean, they came to the rescue of their SDV squad. Mm-hmm. The Gold Squadron SEALs. I mean, they were on their way to come to the aid of Army Rangers.
Yeah.
Like, were they in trouble? Yeah. Is it dangerous? Yep. You gonna go? We sure are.
Yep.
I don't know. I mean, it's if Americans are in trouble, I mean, you're gonna go.
I mean, that's when you start talking about Tommy Norris and his activities.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly right. Like I mean, how much did Tommy risk? To come to rescue somebody who he never knew. I think 11 other Americans had died attempting to rescue those two the pilot and the navigator. He was there with his Vietnamese Rangers. I mean, like the thing that never ceases to amaze me is the fact that the SEAL teams were the recipient of all of that accumulated knowledge, of all that legacy, Darby's legacy and the Cabanatuan legacy and the Point de Hoc, all that knowledge got compressed into the Ranger School, and there are no Rangers. So the SEAL teams became the biggest, collection of Ranger School graduates in the U.S. military. And then, not only, is there that connection with Tommy Norris, leading Vietnamese Rangers, but the SEALs at the 7th Platoon SEALs during the Tet Offensive at Me Too, Bob Gallagher leads a squad of SEALs, through the streets of Me Too to help call in airstrikes for the stranded Vietnamese SEALs or Vietnamese Rangers. But yeah, Tommy Norris coming, risking everything, and he and his Rangers had undergone, a pretty terrible mortar attack the night before he went out on that raid, or went out on that rescue mission. I can't remember off the top of my head how many of his Rangers were killed in that attack, but I mean, combat ineffective. He only had a handful of Rangers left, and him and Kit, still decide there's an American in trouble, we're going to get him. It's just remarkable to me. He goes out and talking to. So you asked the question, how do you compress, essentially what's a 3-year period of history into a single, 15-page chapter? And, you have two of, the most, iconic SEAL missions of the war that occurred during this period, or not two, but multiple. I mean, you've got, Bob Carey's mission, you've got Tommy Norris's mission, you've got Thornton's mission to rescue Norris. At some point I had the idea, like, I can't cover all of that. And it's not necessarily, it's not outside the scope of what I was doing, but it's redundant to what I've already shown. So I don't need to do that. But I do want to cover it in some, and pay it a nod, or, describe it in a way that other folks probably haven't. And I had read, the books on Tommy and Mike Thornton, and I'd read the book on Tommy rescuing, or the most recent books on those events. And the things that I noticed that they didn't cover were the Medal of Honor ceremonies for each event. And I thought, wouldn't that be an interesting way to, wrap up the book with this, with Tommy Norris's Medal of Honor ceremony? Because Mike Thornton's Medal of Honor ceremony happened several years earlier. Tommy's doesn't happen until 1976. Vietnam War is over. Fall of Saigon has happened. You can capture all of this here, this history that's happened if you use that moment as a vehicle. So that's what I did. I contacted Tommy Norris, and he was Mark Robbins, who was on that deployment, who lost his eye to a machine gunner's bullet. Tommy had helped counsel him through losing the eye, and So Mark had Tommy's phone number. So I just cold called him one day, got him on the phone, and had a kind of a series of talks with him. But I mean, he just couldn't have been just a more accessible, more friendly guy, just a humble guy. Considering everything he's been through, everything he's done. And what was funny is he always, he didn't minimize what he did minimize what he did, but he also was so proud of, his post-war, career in the FBI. Mm-hmm. He had this in addition to his, SEAL career, he had this legendary FBI career. He was a undercover agent. He was going after international terrorists as an undercover agent, and his cover was that of a one-eyed arms dealer, and nobody ever doubted him. He was he went after white supremacists in Idaho. One of the best stories that I heard about him was that he was up on a wire, and he had been listening to this white supremacist for a few months, and he knew that this guy had this big Rottweiler that it was his pride and joy. He loved this dog, and he was taking him to the vet for some not serious issue, but he was going to leave the dog there overnight. So Tommy, having listened to this guy's voice for a month, he could imitate him pretty well. So the night that the dog was there, Tommy makes a phone call to the vet. He's like, "Hey, while the dog's there, why don't you go ahead and neuter him?" I don't know if it's true. I don't know if this is an accurate story, but this is all. It didn't get in the book because I couldn't verify it. The other story that I heard, and this was from a Vietnam-era SEAL who was one of the first team leaders at HRT. So he had. So Tommy wasn't one of the founders of HRT, but he was one of the plank owners. He was one of the first guys to go through the HRT selection. So HRT they were conducting one of their very first operations in 1985. It was they were trying to apprehend a Puerto Rican nationalist who essentially it was a terrorist, but they were conducting I believe an arrest warrant, and they were going up the stairs to this guy's house. He leans over the balcony with a machine gun and stitches the entire assault team and shoots one operator in the eye. The team backs out, and Charles or Sandy Prudy, who's a Silver Star SEAL himself, the team leader for HRT, he's trying to come up with a plan to go in and get this guy. Tommy comes running up to Sandy. He goes, "Sandy, I got a plan to get this guy." He's like, "All right, Tommy, what's the plan? How about I run upstairs and kill him?"
Check. Freaking outstanding. I don't know if we could find a better place to wrap it up than that. The book is awesome. We've been in and out of different stories. We're not even touching what's in this book. This book is just absolutely filled with incredible stuff. It's an incredible story. So get the book. Echo, you got anything?
I don't.
You sure?
I'm sure.
All right. Ben, I've kept you captive. Speaking of hostage rescue, I think you're going to get busted out of here in a second. Somebody's probably looking for you. So appreciate you coming.
I can't thank you enough. This is a treat for me. Anytime I get to talk about this stuff is great. Thanks for the support of the book too. This is I can't thank you enough.
Well, the amount of effort that you put in this book, the product is just outstanding. And I can't even fathom that there would be someone else that would go through the effort that you did to do this. You're you got issues, dude. You got issues.
That's true. But so do you.
Oh, I do too. I know.
I mean, you think about it, leaving the teams is a traumatic event. That's traumatic, which you have proved. Look at this. Look at the infrastructure that's surrounding you at this point. You have to do something to account for that trauma. And I always used to think that I was immune to, leaving the teams, and I was never going to, fill it with anything else. And, I'd never gotten any tattoos. I'd never, I didn't get into triathlons or anything like that. I just had this huge blind spot creeping up on me that I didn't even know about. And once this thing found me, I mean, I was hostage to it. Like, there wasn't anything. I mean, it dominated my life. I mean, it was, I'd try to really, curtail the amount of time that I put into it. I'd work in the morning, I'd work in the evening, after the kids were in bed. But what I found was that I would leave off writing or researching, and then throughout the day, this thing would just be on a loop in my head, and I couldn't break away. And it was like that for 10 years.
When it got published, were you already thinking about your next book, or were you just like, I need a breather?
So I when I was writing the book, I had kind of if I wasn't thinking about a paragraph or a specific issue, I had this sort of mental loop going on in my head, and it was always like, what's the point? What's the point? What's the point? What's the point? What's the point of this book? What's the point of this chapter? What's the point of this sentence? What am I doing? What's the point? What's the point? What's the purpose? And that question was always on a loop in my head. And then when I turned the final manuscript in, and I was done, and I didn't have that question to think about, I was a little lost. And I found myself, like, I took a walk in my neighborhood, and and all of a sudden I found myself sort of subconsciously thinking, I started to say, what's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? And I've fortunately, through a lot of counseling, through some distance from the book, I've been able to, take a pause. And I kind of gave myself, mentally a year, from the date of publication until, so from a year. So July 20th is when it came out. I'm giving myself till July 20th of 2022 before I really start, buckling down or start beating myself up about what's next. So
I'm a psycho because once I get done, as soon as I get done and turn in the final manuscript, well, first of all, before that even happens, I'm already plotting. I already got that next book. One of them has bubbled to the surface, and I'm ready to rock and roll. And so by the time the book comes out, when one of my books gets published, the other one is already being formulated and kind of being written, which is really annoying. Because I also have like the repeat loop in my head, like, oh, this could be good, this could be good. And as soon as that, I go, there's no moment to go, cool.
No. No.
Yeah. So
I mean, there was maybe an afternoon. I did reward myself at the end of each chapter. I would get drunk, and I wouldn't go out drinking or anything like that. I never did. When
you got done with the chapter, would it be like that's the rough chapter, or is that like, hey, I mean,
yeah, it was the first draft. Okay. I knew that I was coming back for it.
Yeah.
But I mean, just getting, putting that flag in the ground and being like, I'm done with that chapter. Like, I felt like, even if I knew that it wasn't perfect, even if I knew if I was going to have to come back, at least I knew
the meat was there.
The meat was there. The content was there, if I had let myself, get that far, then I knew what the point of the chapter was. I knew why that chapter was important, and I knew the point that I was trying to make. So at least I had the bones of the chapter. The structure was good. Whether or not I was going to come back and add stuff on, the Cuban frogmen or something like that, or, gosh.
Where are you leaning towards your next book? You must have an idea in that.
I have an idea, but it's very private.
Very private. All right. You said no one's going to steal any of your ideas.
It's not that.
Because no one has enough time or
it's
commitment.
Not. It has nothing to do with that. It's that I need that in my head. If I say it out loud for whatever reason, it'll be like I need the motivation of it. I need the unfinished quality of it to motivate me to.
That's one thing I noticed is in SEAL training. Guys that were like saying like, oh, I'm in SEAL training. Those guys like didn't seem to make it.
Yeah.
So maybe it's the same kind of thing for you. You don't want to get it out there because it's almost like you get rewarded for it. You get a little mini reward when someone goes, oh, wow, that sounds awesome. You already got paid.
Yeah,
you're not allowing yourself to get paid.
Yeah.
That's a good move. I like it.
That's right.
I like it. Don't allow yourself to get paid, man. Don't go credit. Don't take credit. So you're not even taking any credit from me, from Echo. You're just taking nothing from us.
No, you
have to earn it over here.
What's in here?
I was going to say, because no one's going to take your idea about some random document written in 1953 about some, new nuclear warhead that led to whatever.
How'd you know?
Yeah, there you go. Well, awesome, man. Thanks for coming down. You're welcome back here anytime. I've got some ideas in my head for like some kind of something to do with some sort of podcast scenario with you. I don't even know what it is yet, but
yes,
yeah,
agree.
We'll work something out like that.
I'm committing.
Oh,
so
right on.
Yeah.
See, well, I kind of feel like I already did it because I just said it, so it's kind of like I got the reward. Hey, I can just move on now. This, it's pretty much done. Hey, if you want to support this podcast, get some Jocko fuel. We supported this podcast today, racking and stacking some Jocko fuel. It's been a long day, even for Echo Charles, who's usually in the cruise mode over there. Are your vocal cords tired?
I handled.
Get some stuff from JockoFuel.com. Get some milk. See, we haven't eaten today, so my milk detector is high order right now. It's super hype right now. I don't want anything else. I don't want a steak. I don't want a cheeseburger. I don't want a turkey leg. I want milk right now.
Plus, as far as your macros go, you're going to need that help this late in the day.
Yeah. What I'm saying? Did I go catabolic earlier?
I did
Jackson Steel this morning.
You're risking that big time right now.
Dude, we're not going to let that happen. When we get home, we get some milk up in the system.
Yep.
And so we're good there. So check that out, JockoFuel.com. Go to Wawa if you want to get some of these drinks that are freaking awesome. Because, did we get jittery today? Did I get jittery? Did you get jittery? No, you felt smooth. All day.
They're good for you too, by the way.
Good, 100% good for you.
You're not going to pay any price in the future.
Are you thinking you're going to get like type 2 diabetes because you drank some sugary drink? Because you're not, because that's sweetened with monk fruit right there.
It's true. It's true.
That's what I'm talking about. It's a true statement.
No diabetes.
I mean, this is my first energy drink.
Ever?
Yeah, ever. I don't think I've ever had a... no, yeah.
Dang, good move.
That's weird. What'd you drink in Iraq?
Coffee.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that'll do it. You're a coffee guy. Vitamin Shop too. OriginUSA.com if you want to get some jeans, if you want to get a belt, if you want to get a wallet, if you want to get a pair of boots, if you need a jiu-jitsu gi. Jiu-jitsu's going high right now. It's going high order. Everyone's training. Right? Yeah. You feeling it?
I feel it.
The whole world's training. You training, man? Training the jiu-jitsu?
No, I don't have time.
You're
how do you
freaking
do this?
sitting in an archive somewhere with your nose in a book, dude.
I mean,
get all the mats.
For all the fans out there, I'm training a lot.
Hell yeah.
OriginUSA.com. Go get yourself some cool stuff. All of it is made in the United States of America. Look, we spent trying to fight communism. We fought against communism, and we're still fighting against communism. But it's not in the jungles anymore. Right now, it's in your wallet. You can give your money to a communist country. Literally, you can do that. I recommend you don't. I recommend you don't give money to communism. I recommend you give it to democracy and America and hardworking American people. That's what we're talking about. OriginUSA.com. Go get some freedom, son.
As opposed to supporting uniquely affordable labor.
Oh, that's what they call slave labor. That's what they call slave labor.
That's true.
Yeah, we're not down for that cause. What
also,
else?
Jocko Store. Boom. Represent. We're on the path. We're working out. We're lifting. Sometimes we want to represent. You want a shirt that says discipline equals freedom on it. A hoodie. A hat. The word good.
Shirt locker. Shirt locker.
Shirt locker. That's a unique.
Sometimes Echo talks himself into a corner to no escape.
No, Brad, no such thing. Either way, what that is, it's a different unique shirt with unique designs. Very
unique.
Good. Good feedback on those ones.
Yeah.
Good feedback.
What's the latest? Can you say what the latest was? What was the last?
This past one, it's April right now, so March was the one that you came out with a long time ago. Everybody must get stoned.
Oh yeah,
that one was controversial.
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 We made a shirt. So I heard from the Nom guys. One Nam guy in particular was like, yeah, he went to get his gun from the armory after he had been home, and he went to check out his weapon. Someone else had taken it to Vietnam. His stoner came back. So a guy took his stoner on deployment, did a 6-month deployment, came back. When he went to pick his weapon up from the armory, etched in the buttstock, it said, "Everybody must get stoned." And I was like, that's the best thing ever. You know, the stoner machine gun, if you don't know, the stoner 63. That's what a lot of SEALs carried in Vietnam. And it's a badass weapon, so we made that t-shirt. So you could get a cool t-shirt like that. Some people didn't like it, huh?
Well,
they're scared.
They were
thinking we were talking about the marijuana.
They were sensitive to the controversial nature.
Yeah.
Of
some people don't like marijuana. Some people don't like guns.
It's true.
You know, they had more to do with guns than marijuana. It had actually nothing to do with
you hit a lot of folks.
Yeah, the friction
big
point
cross-section
was the marijuana, not the guns.
Yeah.
That's my feedback.
Don't you feel like you're kind of in a stoked situation when someone's like, "Oh yeah, bro, everyone must get stoned, but what's the gun?" Well, it's a stoner 63. Nom. What? It's a conversation starter. Anyways, Shirt Locker, if you want to get cool stuff, check it out. JockoStore.com. Subscribe to the podcast. Subscribe to JockoUnderground.com so we can be standing strong in the event of a total meltdown of our democratic society.
Also with that, and you know, that is true. Mm-hmm. That is true. Mm-hmm. But you get life advice every week from Jocko. Yeah. Bruh, tell me, come on, every week. Life advice. You need life advice. Boom, ask Jocko every single week.
Yeah, I answer questions. I answer all. There's like a special way to contact us if you're part of the Jocko Underground. Then you can submit questions. We're answering them. So get some of that. YouTube. We got a YouTube channel. You can see the videos that I am the assistant director of. Therefore, they are awesome. And even the ones that Echo just works on by himself are okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Psychological warfare. Flipside Canvas. Dakota Meyer. He's got cool stuff to hang on your wall, dude. If we made a Ben Milligan T-shirt, what would it be?
Oh, I mean, you'd sell a dozen. Can you imagine?
I wonder what could we do? What would it be?
It'd have to. I mean, how pale am I? It'd have to be something like to capture. You know, this is as tan as I am.
Oh,
if this is in black and white, it only gets worse.
Yeah.
If the shirt comes off, it's only worse.
So it'd have to be something super white.
Yeah. I mean, just like just vague outline.
Oh, do like a white T-shirt with like a white on white.
Yeah, with like golden, like yeah.
And then it could just say Mulligan.
We'll come up with something. That's good.
You'd be surprised, man. People would be stoked to represent. They'd be like, "Oh,
perverts.
Yeah. Books by water beneath the walls. Again, bruh. I know you like the title. I get it. I get it. Next time you're going to title a book, just come and consult. Come and consult with me.
You got it.
Come and consult. Hit me up. We'll spend a 15-minute conversation. There's a beautiful and amazing and powerful and strong context behind that title that 4 people get. And it is, as I said, this is to me the most important historical book about the SEALs, and I'm gonna also say, for me, the most important historical book about special operations. And you write about everyone in there. The Rangers, the Special Forces, the Scouts and Raiders, it's all in there. It's just an outstanding book. So pick up that book, By Water Beneath the Walls. You know what? Do me a favor right now, as you're listening, write this down. By Water Beneath the Walls, because there's no way you're going to remember that title. So there you go. Hey, I've written a bunch of books too. Final Spin. That's the novel that I wrote. Leadership Strategy and Tactics Field Manual. The Code, the Evaluations, Protocols, Discipline Equals Freedom Field Manual. Way of the Warrior Kid 1, 2, 3, and 4. Get those books for the kids that you know. Please do that. It will legitimately, guaranteed, make their lives better, make them better into better human beings, make them more capable for the world. And the world is not an easy place. Mikey and the Dragons. Get that for the little munchkins running around the house. About Face, Extreme Ownership, Dichotomy Leadership. Check out those books as well. EchelonFront.com if you need some help with leadership inside your organization. Online training at extremeownership.com. This is not the only place to learn leadership, and leadership is not an inoculation that you get and now you're good to go. You got to train just like the gym. That's why we got extremeownership.com, so we can train you every single day. And you want to ask me some questions, go on there. I'm on there. I'm on a Zoom call talking to me. I'm 5 inches away from your head answering your questions. If you want to help service members through an incredible organization, go to americasmightywarriors.org. It's Mark Lee's mom, Mama Lee, helping in so many different ways. She's tremendous, and it's a tremendous organization. Don't forget about Horses and Heroes. Micah Fink, heroesandhorses.com. Micah Fink. He's doing cool stuff on horses. Riding horses through the wilderness. 41 days. Legitness. We're on social media. We're right in there, inside the algorithms. Don't get sucked into them. I'm at Jocko Willink. Echo's at Echo Charles. Ben is at
Milligan 3 on Instagram, and then Ben H. Milligan on Twitter.
What do you post on Instagram? Anything?
Yeah, I post on there. I'll try and put on like a post a week. I'm not super active on it. I'm not super good, but I'll if I'm usually I try and tie something back to American history or something like that. I was down at the World War II Museum, which is incredible. There was a right outside the World War II Museum, there's a statue of Anne Frank, and they just happened to position it directly in front of a shell-pocked section of Utah beach that they had brought back, and that seemed like just an incredible it made the whole effort, the whole thing seem worthwhile. Like, just what do these guys do, and what did they do it for? It's right here. Everything's right here.
Awesome. Cool stuff. So check out his Instagram. And Ben, thanks once again for coming on. I really appreciate it. Appreciate it.
This was fantastic.
Appreciate what you've done for the teams, not only through your service in the teams, but also for this book. And thanks to all the military personnel out there that are writing history as we speak by keeping us free around the world. To the police, law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, dispatchers, correctional officers, Border Patrol, Secret Service, all the first responders, thank you for what you are doing right now to keep us safe here at home. And once again, there are opportunities out there, but they're not gonna beat down your door. You got to look for them. There's an expression we used to have in the teams, look for work. Remember that expression? Look for work. So when you're a new guy and you're hitting a target, a training operation, and you don't really know what to do, so you're kind of standing there with your weapon at high port, not doing anything. And some freaking platoon chief is going to go, hey, Willink, look for work. And that means you pick up your weapon and you go look for an angle to cover. Well, that's what the SEALs did. That's where we came from. We came from a position where we were just out there looking for work. Don't do what everyone else is doing. First of all, don't just stand there and do nothing, but don't just do what someone else is doing. It's already getting done. Look for the angle that's not being covered. Look for the job that no one else wants. Look for the job that is harder, that's more complex, that's cold and wet and miserable. The job that requires more effort than anything else, and more than anybody else is willing to put up with. That's where the opportunity is. And then go and get after it. And until next time, this has been Milligan and Echo and Jocko out.